have some more free time, I can spend on Braid. Let's see what else is here. Pretty sure I did all the KC. Mark 10 ball. Oh yeah, wait. Set up the chat.
These are excerpts from an interview by Mark Tenbosch. Mark has been a friend of mine for quite a number of years now. I met him when he first started working on his four-dimensional game Miegakure, which he is still working on. He's one of the few people who really understands the kind of design that I do at a deep level, so it was an interesting conversation.
Hey, come back here. Design of the early puzzle.
So I'm thinking of like the beginning of World 2-4, where there's a puzzle piece right above the entry door and there's like nothing near it, and you're like, how am I supposed to get this? There's a monster there, and it just sort of seems like it's a thing to dodge and avoid and maybe get killed by, and then you rewind or whatever. But really, you like get the monster back to the other side, and it's like, is that a rewind puzzle? Not really. I mean, I don't know, man. It's an interesting puzzle. It's weird because aesthetically, it feels like it does the right thing in a number of ways. You have this challenge that's very minimal and looks impossible. There's just like a puzzle piece in the air. What are you going to do about that? And then there's misdirection to it, because that monster way over there doesn't seem like it's relevant. It seems like the goal is to guard you from going forward, and you have to do something quite specific to solve it, because you have to catch the monster on the monster walks fast enough that he'll probably fall in the pit and die, and so you have to catch him on the platform with the right timing to
What? Where was the Bosch man?
something, man. Because that monster way over there, the monster walks fast enough that he'll probably fall in the pit and die, and so you have to catch him on the platform with the right timing to just barely get him across, and then you have to like jump over him or something without.
I don't get it. What? Why did you went through this? Huh. Why is the story text like that?
What ended up in the game is then sort of these panels of text, which are very much like Einstein's dream in my mind, where it's trying to do a metaphor for what the mechanic is about, and then the gameplay, which is very mechanical and like doesn't really connect to the metaphor directly. So like those two elements feel a little bit disconnected to me, but also like you sort of explained how that came about, so I'm interested.
I don't
if you
say
have more to say about that.
disconnected.
I mean, it's complicated, right?
Yeah.
Like, I definitely knew that some people weren't going to care about the fiction part of the game. Because especially when you make a 2D platformer, you have some idea of... I just could very easily imagine somebody not wanting to read the story, and in fact, that was very clear. And actually, in the original prototype, the story parts they were just like on a screen, like introducing World 2. Here's a giant page of text.
Right.
Press spacebar to continue, and that you could especially see people start reading it and then go like, skip, I want to play the game, which is what I would do with most games today as well. Unless like I have to, if I sit down in front of a game and it starts doing story stuff, really like what I'm seeing in order to stay with it, because otherwise I don't have faith that this thing is going to be any good, and I just let me get to the part where I get to do something, right? But so the way that I squared that a little bit I was like, I want the story things to be a little bit more interactive, but I do want them to be together and coherent as a story segment. Like, one thing you could imagine is that instead of being front-loaded story in front of each world like this, like Cave Story had been out for a long time, right? And that just, you meet characters over the course of this
It's the
linear platformer,
same.
and they tell you things, and those things come together to make the narrative, right? I mean, it's like AAA games did for a long time, but it's like the indie version of that.
It's
And
already
that could have
talked
been the
about
model for this, but it
this.
just wasn't what I wanted to do.
No,
I
he's
wanted to
talking
very
about this, but
straightforwardly
a
be
different
influenced
person.
by books. And
You know,
one of the
this
things
person
about
doesn't
books,
seem to contribute
as
anything new
different
to it.
from some other things, especially the way games adopt them, is that books kind of want you to have an attention span, right? Because it's this long sequence of text. And I don't know if I ever explicitly had that as a mission statement, but I definitely felt that way. It's like, look, if you want to have an attention span and read this, that's fine. If you don't, I'm going to set it up so that it's in pieces and you could just sort of run by all the pieces, you know. But like I could have, you know, in those
He used
little
to do a
book stands that are
commentary
in the
on how he
game,
made
those
the
could have just been
commentary.
scattered throughout the worlds, and you could have encountered them as you could. That would be a very easy
How he
change.
designed this.
But then it would be harder to get the coherent picture of them put together, which might have been good in some ways, because I did like this idea of an activity of trying to put together the ideas of the story and what is going on. But I just really wanted it to be front loaded that way, you know?
I think it is nice that you have those two separate pieces and they sort of like bounce off each other, which you wouldn't get if you.
It's definitely a thing that some people complain about, but you know, you can't listen to everybody's complaints, right? So
Yeah, you have to decide something.
yeah, that's like I could have done it, but it would have been a fairly different game, you know, if we and what would that decision have been based on, right? Like, I kind of have a fear that, maybe a realistic fear, that a lot of players will not want to read something. So let me design for that. It's like, okay, but like, maybe it's not that experimental of a game in that dimension anymore. Like, I wanted to do this thing that I hadn't seen games do.
Oh shit! I think. No, wait. How do you get to the other ladder? Like this. Well, I mean, wait. Yes. And this way I can get to the other ones. This is the right way. What is this? Why are the levels so geometrically
All right, so the thing that struck me the most when I played Braid was how minimalistic the puzzle design felt. And I think that was like sort of the thing that blew me away the most, maybe, I want to say. And I was wondering if you had more thoughts on that. I've sort of heard you talk about it a little bit, but maybe we can go deeper there.
That's a direction that I went more in over time, that I kind of discovered while I was working on the game. There definitely was more complex level geometry in the beginning and more monsters and stuff. I think one idea that I had early on was, I want levels to fit on one screen so that they're framed, like whenever possible. Like, sometimes it'll be fun to have bigger levels, but if everything fits on one screen and you're thinking about a hard puzzle, you can see all the elements right there. And you're taking away some artificial difficulty and you get to the essence of the puzzle, right? Good puzzles are going to be things where you can see all the information. And that means they're not that complicated. And I had played puzzle games where the reason the puzzle was hard is because you have to do 17 things in the right order or
puzzle
whatever.
with
And I was like, no, that's not this
shadows
game,
and
because
two
this game
shadow
should be about
doors.
time. Because I'd been doing
it's so
experimental
simple
gameplay
and
workshop, I
yet
had this idea that
so hard to figure out.
every puzzle should be on theme for the particular world. And so if something is on theme, how complicated can it be?
When it was like a
Because if there's some specific idea about it, if that idea only takes place in one part of the puzzle, what's the rest of the puzzle doing? It's kind of dead weight on that. Unless the idea happens multiple times to like fill out. But that's hard. It's like a lot harder to
Of
design
course.
one idea taking place in multiple ways. We actually do that on the new game a little bit, and actually Zach is really good at that. He's maybe the best person I've ever seen at that particular thing. So I think that gravitated towards simpler puzzles, but also just sometimes I would be working on a puzzle and I would be unhappy with it because it looks ugly or just this thing is weird. And then I would delete the thing that was weird and I would like it more. And I kept seeing that trend. I was like, okay, this game is better when I'm more minimal. But that was only something that I really had clarity about, I would say, by the middle or 2/3 of the way through development, for sure.
Ah. Why are there interactive puzzle pieces?
Is there more to say about why there is a puzzle actually in the world? Like, why did you want to do that? And
That was just the idea that I had, right? Like, that was the, so there's the question, how do you get collectibles and make them meaningful? People probably don't think about it as a collectible, but, you know, in Braid, a different way that this happens is as you solve each world, I guess it's once you complete the actual puzzle piece, then that stairway sort of shows up and you can get up to the attic. And it's sort of like you're collecting the stairway pieces, right? But that's a way of making it matter because you can go climb on those stairs even when they're incomplete, right? And you're like, oh, I can get up 2 of them, but then this one's gone. But I see if that were in place, I could go up 2 more. And like it just, even though logically speaking, you need 5 out of 5,
right.
it's just better in some way. And so with the puzzle pieces, it's like, okay, why collect puzzle pieces? 1, it like matters. 2, it could tie into the story because you have an image, right, that you're gradually revealing, and it gave pacing that you can play with. So that's why there are puzzle frames in the middle of levels often. It's to give you a break and some variety in what you're doing in the middle of the level before you go back and do like more hard puzzles. It's like, oh, I can, if I got 5 of the pieces, I could try putting them together, or I could, if they don't fit quite, I could at least look at them and try and figure out what corner this corner is, even if it doesn't attach to something, or I can try to figure out what the scene's going to be. You have a gradual reveal of the scene that's going to be in the image. All those things are positive, and I didn't have a different idea that was better, that had as many positives.
So then did you place those panels where you have to put the puzzles in locations where you thought people needed breaks, or?
I think so. Also, though, like it was a general heuristic that I'm trying to give people a nice break in the middle, but it's also just a little bit intuition and a little bit trying to work with the designs of levels that I have. And like sometimes I felt a little bit stuck, like the ideal for this place for this puzzle frame would be here, but I kind of can't do that without destroying the level because it's too tight, so I have to put it on the next level, and it's not quite where I would like it to be or whatever. There's also, this is kind of an unspoken rule in the game, but I believe you'll find it intact. They're never at the beginning of a level because you like have to get to them. It's like
A reward.
you have to earn it a little bit somehow. So they're usually toward the end. It actually would have been fun to put one at the beginning of a level, but I just never did that.
The pattern breaking thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
No. What would it?
I don't feel that the
Wouldn't make any
explanation I gave
sense.
Mark about why there are puzzle pieces in the game was very easy to follow, so I'll try to clarify. As a baseline, there could have just been a counter. Each time you solve a puzzle, you get a star or something that then disappears and no longer exists except as a number. And when that number gets to 12, you've finished that world. But when I imagined the game working this way, it made the puzzles feel more arbitrary, in my estimation at least. I wanted puzzles to feel grounded and interesting and important, like you're working towards something other than just raising a number. Making the collectibles into puzzle pieces gives the player a new activity to do, on which he can make partial progress between puzzles. And this isn't just busy work, because the puzzle image communicates something, and each time the player connects another piece, he gradually figures out what the image is showing, and that's interesting. But the image isn't just random information. It refers to the subject matter in the story screens and the overall thematics of the game. So having you collect physical puzzle pieces also connects the puzzle gameplay to the story in a way it wouldn't otherwise be. The ladders to the attic are a similar idea. It could just be a number, and when the number gets to 5, you reach the end game. But I felt it was important to instantiate that number physically in the game, even though the ladders are not as rich or interesting as the puzzle pieces. They really can't be, because there are so few.
Pete.
You know, one of the levels that shows up again in the game a few times is this level called the Pit.
Yeah, I was going to ask
And
about
it's
that one.
super. It's one of the most minimal. It's
Yeah, and
literally
it's
one
beautiful.
screen,
Yeah.
and there's a pit.
Yeah.
And then what can we do with
And it
that,
happens
right?
like 5 times too, which is great.
Yeah. And so that in the original prototype of the game, that was the level where I introduced the magic key. And the magic key was the predecessor to the current World 3 stuff we were talking about where things don't rewind. But the idea back then was like, okay, the key doesn't rewind. It's
I
just
see.
like special.
Just
so there
the
was no
key.
sparkles. It wasn't
Yeah,
like
but
a
what
modifier
about
on
the
objects the way
Pete
that it
with
is now.
the
It simply
ring?
was
Okay.
the key is
Literally
kind of cool.
nothing.
And I was like, okay, what's a simple way
Just a
That-
skip level.
you demonstrate that to people? Well,
Just
I want
making
to
a
force them to
pattern, I
figure it
guess.
out and have this epiphany from figuring it out. What if they have to go into a pit and get the key, and the pit is a little higher than they can jump? So maybe they think that they could jump out, but you jump in and then you're just stuck, and then you basically have to rewind out. And then, you know, if you go and you look at this level, it was a very long level that totally doesn't fit on the screen. And you go to the right for a while, you jump on some monsters or whatever. And then I was following game design advice, traditional good game design advice, which is before you find a key, you must encounter the locked door and not be able to proceed,
Okay.
because otherwise you don't appreciate the key. Otherwise you just get the key.
Of
right?
course, right.
Now I have violated that rule sort of in the final game, because you have the pit and then the gate on the other
But
side,
it's like on
and you get the key
same
first, or you
screen.
encounter the key first. But because it's 2D and it all fits on one screen, you see the gate and it's kind of fine, right?
Well, yeah. Well, I think what it's saying is you should frustrate the player first, there, so that they appreciate it. Which doesn't mean they have to see it. They just have
Yeah.
to feel frustrated.
I don't know
about
if it's about frustrated even, but it's like if you get a key and then you see a locked door that looks like a really badass locked door, but you just have the key, you don't even maybe realize when you picked it up.
it.
or
Right.
did
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
first.
That's
Th-
sort
then
of
it's
what I
like a
mean,
nothing burger, and nothing
Yes.
burgers feel bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So it's about avoiding that
Right.
kind of a thing.
Which
too.
you've succeeded at that, right? Because
Yeah.
you fall into the pit and then you don't know what to do, and then therefore that's the part where you're like, oh, I need to be doing something. Something needs to happen. It's just not given to you.
Yes. But to go back to the original level, it was, so you would go left to right along the ground, right? You would run into this gate and you're blocked. So you climb up this trellis and like back left. And then over here, there's like a pit, and it didn't fit vertically. So it was like kind of half scrolled off the screen. And then you would go into
So
this pit over
hilarious
here and
to
be stuck
see.
and come back out and come down
Early
around. It was way
development.
less elegant. It was ugly. I mean, it worked. Like mechanically, I could have shipped that level, right? But I turned that level into the absolute minimum thing that you see, because it was like, okay, what is actually good about this, right? And then what do I really need to do that thing that's good? And then also, you know, I had just some idea of, hey, it's really cool to do things with the minimum amount, right? That's sort of an Eastern aesthetic to some degree. There's some Western traditions that do this too, but like, what can I do something highly effective with a minimum amount of material, right? And it's a game design application of that idea. And then once I did that a few times, I saw that it was working, I guess.
Is it a programmer thing as well? Or like, do you think it's sort of your programmer part? Like liking elegance in design, like minimum code for what it's doing, things like that?
It's quite possible. I mean, I didn't have that association in my head very deliberately at the time, but
Yeah, of course.
it could be just that I trained myself that way to appreciate that.
Okay, that's interesting.
Now it's weird because so the aesthetics of the game visually are
Oh.
not minimal, right? Like the style, the painterly style of the game is very much not minimal. So it's not like I'm saying minimalism in all places is the right thing, but it's complicated. Right?
Well, I think, yeah, I don't think minimalism is always the right thing or not. I mean, it's just an aesthetic that you can decide to pick, and you're like, okay, I'm going to go for minimalism, and that's what the game is going to be about. And then there are going to be some good things and some bad things that come out of that.
Yeah.
There's a third person there? The guy who said yeah was
You know,
like,
it's a way to
different voice.
because it's 2D. Plus, good. Have game
Go for minimalism, and that's what the game is going to be about. And then there are going to be some good things and some bad things that come out of that.
Yeah.
Ew. A strange grace note in face.
So World 6 is the problem that I have is that it's again, like, I think it's all very clean design, so I don't have
anything to
things
say about it. Yeah, that's fine.
There's one tiny thing where, like, that's sort of related, where you put the flower where you're supposed to put the ring.
I mean, so that whole puzzle is more messy than I would like. So in a game like that where things move continuously, then making a puzzle clean is kind of about avoiding proximity between wrong solutions and right solutions in terms of like how close they get you to the goal. A dumb example is if you're not supposed to be able to jump across a gap, that gap should be really wide, right? So that you don't think that that's what you're supposed to be trying to do. In this particular puzzle, it was really hard to get it to feel clean actually. A related but different
You're
puzzle is the one
still
we talked
saying
about
that you can
with putting the ring on
jump
the
over.
cannon.
Right.
That one is cleaner because there's kind of nowhere else to put it. In this one we're talking about, you could put the ring on the ground and it does affect you, but not quite enough. It's less clear that it's failure, I guess. And maybe that's why, really, okay, the real reason why I put the flower there is like, I don't expect people to actively use that as a hint how to solve the puzzle unless they have some weird intuition moment. Really, what it was is after you solve it, it's a little bit cute that, like, oh, that flower is there as a thing of where I should
Yeah, I
put
don't
this.
think
But also,
it's really
it's
that
a little
easy
bit
to
cute because
figure out.
that flower is in the earlier version of the level. Because this is a reprise of a World 3, and
I also
that
thought
has
like
the
the
flower as
flower
well.
could be some kind of
And
other secret.
you don't really know why at the time. And it's for this, moderately tenuous, but definitely there's a point to it reason that happens way later in the game. And I just like that. It's not very logical. It's not even necessarily very playable, but it's just a thing that's there.
It's again interesting to contrast that in this case you were okay with helping the player.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is in part because I felt that it's a little messy. Like I just remember there being a lot of adjustment to like get the timing good. I mean, I could have put more gaps that you jump over or something, but I opted for simplicity in the end.
You could have like a granulated thing too, where like there's pits that you could put it in, so like it discretizes the locations.
Yeah, I guess I just felt like that was too complicated and ugly, right? Although, the judgment of how ugly things is, often in design, we're making that based on the mock-up level. And then when you do like the final graphics, it could get a fiction to it and a visual pleasantness that makes you not mind it so much.
Ah, flower. Making the obvious thing wrong. Deliberate positioning of keys.
And I thought that puzzle is doing the thing that is very common, I think, in puzzle design, where you make the obvious thing the wrong thing, and you have the right thing sort of away in a pit where you have to go through and get the object. This sort of misdirection of like here, try it first, do it wrong, then see what you've done wrong, and then now you have to figure out how to do it correctly. But I'm interested to know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it's complicated, right? I started out,
He
I saw
says
the
that a lot
kind of
in
a
this interview.
situation was unfolding like you're talking about. And then like you
It's
also see what
complicated.
opportunities you can do given this scenario, right? And so this is one
I
instance
feel
of a
like the
thing that I do in
idea
the
first
game
like
where
comes up
it's
and
not the most
then
blatant instance, but I say,
you
okay,
just
you're
try to
supposed to know
rationalize
how
why
this
you
works
did
by
that.
now. So I'm going to set you up to screw up and fail and do the wrong thing if you're just like blindly playing through the game. It's like an interesting way of reminding people that it matters to do the right thing without making a big complicated scenario like a maze where you have to like try to find the key or whatever. It's like, look, you just put the wrong one right there. And in fact, you can open the first gate, I think, and it's fine. And it's like, so yeah, this key, right? It's the wrong key, but this is still savable, right? It's just a rewindable key and a rewindable gate. And like, I go back and get this one, right? You don't actually really fail the puzzle until you go all the way down here, find another key,
Hmm.
don't really think about whether it's the right key or not, and
But
then
it's also
use it,
hard to
right?
like
And
predict
then at that point,
because you don't see it. It's a pit
it's too late.
in which you
Now there's some other
fall.
interesting stuff happening,
Could have
right? So if
designed
I
it
rewind
better.
here back to the point where I have the other key,
It's like
why do I have the other key
intentionally
exactly
designed
now?
this way.
Like, how do you pick up a key? Well, you intersect with the bounding box of the key, it sets the carrying state, whatever, right? What if there's two keys? How do you decide? Well, if they all have the same properties, it doesn't matter, but that's not a situation that ever happens in the game, actually, right? So here, there's a hidden rule that says the rewind exempt key is lower priority
What?
than the other key, and that's the only place I think that really matters is this specific puzzle.
Huh?
But yeah, so
I
I
didn't know
mentioned,
you can
if
do
I
that.
put the other key a little bit further to the left, you would still see them both, and it might engage it. But I wanted people to like preemptively realize what was going on or get caught. And I think most people get caught, even people who understand the game, right?
Yeah.
But I think for me, it was enough to give you another place to go that obviously went out
But
of
why do we
sight.
even want
And it's
to do
like,
that?
well, you just weren't that curious about what was down there, were you, right? You just decided to go use the key first. And it's fine
That's the wrong
until
thing
you
to do.
use the second key on the second gate, and then but that should be obvious. It's like I've got no more keys. As soon as I intersect this gate, this key is going to
Damn.
break, and the gate's going to be open, and there's still one more gate. And I've been everywhere on the level now, right? I've seen what's down the pit. You should, before you do that, know that it's going to fail,
But you
but
can get
people
rid of
usually
the
fail
key.
anyway. And I kind
It's
of
like the
like
only
that as a
way.
designer, right? I'm like, okay, I want to do this
Why?
because it's funny.
Ah,
And so just a little bit more, like, why put the key all the way down a pit and not just like on the other side of those plants? Those plants felt like already enough.
Because I didn't want the player to see the other key
And why didn't you want the player to see the other key?
because it just felt better. So when I start designing the puzzle,
it's
I'm
like an
like,
interrogation.
okay, two keys, three gates. If there's more than
Why?
two
Sure.
gates,
Why
there
did you
either
do
have to
that?
be two keys or you have a rewind exempt gate like pasted 5 times. And that might be funny.
Right. Yeah.
Like that's maybe a thing we could do. Maybe we'll do that
Again,
in the
he repeats
commentary area.
himself.
But I just like this better, right? When I was thinking through the preliminary. Okay, there's going to be two keys. How do you present the two keys? Are they equidistant from the player somehow? That's actually very hard to achieve in a 2D platformer.
You'd have to put them on two platforms and you start on the left and you can go up or down or something.
Yeah, but then like down is going to be like
Easier.
closer,
Yeah.
easier,
Yeah.
or one of them is going to be closer to the center of the screen. Like you can't actually make them equal. So I didn't think that hard about it, right? And I got to do a little bit of fun stuff with like, okay, it's not only like buried off the screen, but it's deep in a pit that you have to rewind yourself out of, right? So that's a little bit of a reprise from the beginning, but it's also again it's to kind of make very clear that this is a rewind exempt key, and you should be thinking about that with regards to the solution of this puzzle, right? Like if you just pick it up, it's like, okay, I see that it's sparkling, right? But no, it's like I have to utilize the property of the key to get the key to begin with in a way that I've already seen. It was in the first level of this world, but still, that's, I think it's a little bit more of the setup of why it feels like the player's fault when they screw up, right?
Okay.
I
Yeah.
did highlight the fact that the key was not rewindable, so when you broke it and then you couldn't rewind it, you really kind of knew. Like, you know? So if I had put the key on the screen so you saw them both, there are some tricks you can do where one of them is more framed and the other one's off to the side, but I didn't feel like that would be very strong. And I wanted to trick people in this one, actually. But it is a very, that is a judgment call, right? Many other designers would do a different thing according to their own personality. So it's rare to have the ability to think about things in a game in a different way. And so I really enjoy when I get the opportunity to do that. You know, when we get to stuff like why set up the keys in that way? Why do you think it's funny if people do it wrong? That's just kind of personal taste for that game even. And I don't do that always. Like Witness does some funny things, but it does them in a different way, right? Like Witness has a puzzle that's funny, that's easy once you realize why it's funny, right? And it's like, oh, there's just different ways to do it. And I think because Braid's a game where you kind of die on spikes a lot and you stomp on monsters that don't really deserve it, like they were just there. It's like, why are you jumping on them? It's got a little bit of a masochistic streak in it, especially, and that's in the fiction of the game as well to some degree.
It has that vibe of, oh, I should have thought about this. You know, like I'm just on zombie mode right now, and I should be more aware. Like it brings you back, which is good.
Okay. The laws of physics are bi-directional.
Time is bidirectional, right? This is one of the things that survived sort of from the original set of ideas about quantum mechanics and relativity, because one of the things we see in physics at all levels, actually, even in
about
like
that.
Newtonian physics, the laws of
think there
physics
were
are
some,
bidirectional with respect to time. Like the only reason that time seems to
evidence
go
that-
more strongly in one direction is like
The time is not
friction and inertia and
bidirectional,
stuff.
actually.
It's like a statistic. What is friction? It's like statistical collisions working out a certain way. The beginning of time is a low entropy state, and the end of time is a high entropy state. And it looks to us while we're inside that like it's just things happening, and then you get more entropy out. But if you like were to stand way back and look at the whole thing, it's like a very simple shape, right? So then when you get into quantum mechanics, it's a little more complicated. But there's this thing called CPT conservation, where
Yeah.
you know the product of these things, it's charge, parity, and direction of time, right? So if you reverse time, if you negate the charge, something like that. But like there's a way that it works out, and it's invariant.
Right. So
either
you
way.
flip one and then the other is flipped.
yeah.
because- Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, how if I was going to write fiction about time going backwards and forwards at the same time? That's not that hard. And in fact, if you make as we found out since then, you can make a quite high budget movie where you just sort of show stuff going both directions. But like, okay, it was an interesting challenge. How do you actually make that happen like for real? What even does that mean? And at first I was like, okay, obviously I could like either have some things simulate backwards or record some gameplay and play it backwards, but you really want the two streams to affect each other,
Right.
right? And that's one way, and that's the levels leading up. And then after that, it's like, okay, how do we use this in the story? How do we do something cool for the ending? And like, how do we use this directionality of time thematically for real, right? As opposed to just saying in the story that things going backwards has some meaning,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And that's where that came from. It was just, how do I make a good world out of this? And then I guess when I had that idea for the ending scene, that's when I knew that that was the last world of the game, right? I knew it was probably one of the later ones because I had the earlier ones figured out, but I was like, okay, that's a good ending, and there we go. And I was pretty hyped because there was basically 1 week where I had the idea, I sat down and programmed it, it basically worked, and then I sent it to one friend and he played it and he was like, yeah, this is cool, right? So there was like a week and a half of like end to end from idea to completely working thing. And it didn't change that much into the final game. It got a little bit bigger with more details. There's more like intermediate things that happen in that level, but it was basically the same idea.
Like the time running backwards in the very end, it didn't really do much. Like what did it actually do? It's just like the story thing. I don't think you can actually interact with anything. Like I tried. Oh wait, is that it? There's a second commentary. Huh.
So then World 1 is pretty easy. It's kind of like given to you almost. Were you okay with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the end game.
So it's a reward almost?
It's a time to break the pattern established by the rest of the game. If you don't do that, isn't an end game really? You know, if it's just more levels, but there's fiction that somehow makes it try to seem more important, that to me is not a good end game.
But is it just that that situation of bidirectional time was not conducive to harder puzzles and therefore that's what it was? Or you just...
There's a little bit of that. Like, I have to work with what I find, right? And so I was like, what can I do with this? Okay, I could make monsters go backwards. I could make other things go backwards, but the little plant guy, it's kind of basically the same backwards as forward. He goes up and down. There's the bunny rabbits, which, again, like I said, the movement is complicated. So, like, you could put in some if statements about to make them go backwards. But, like, I just didn't want to go there. It just didn't seem that good again. It's like, okay, so we made these guys go backwards. Like other things, okay, cloud cannon. It goes backwards. It's the same as going forwards. It's just the clouds congeal on a wall and go backwards. So there isn't one. Other things you kind of can't do. For example, you throw the lever, a platform goes or a door goes, right? You can't start a lever moving and then force the player to throw a switch at a certain time, right? That doesn't make any sense. Now, in the actual finale level, we sort of do have that, but it's like it's the princess throwing the levers and they're kind of causal in both directions, and you probably don't exactly understand what's going on in that case. But when it's scripted like that, you could kind of make it happen. When it's the player doing things, you can't. And so I actually found myself quite limited getting to this point in terms of like what could I actually do? Maybe there's something cool that I didn't think of. It's quite possible, but I was like, okay, this is enough. Like, I think if you jump straight into the finale level, that's a little too hard of an entry. So like here, we've got a little bit of an intro, get used to things going backwards. Isn't that interesting? Is a world in its own right. And then there we go.
What do I do here?
curious how you decided to do a boss.
Honestly, so the boss idea, like sometimes you're just making a game and you're like, hell yeah, wouldn't it be cool to do a platformer boss? I've never done that. So the name of that guy in the code is called Gun Boss because he was going to be holding like a really big gun, right? Now he just spits fireballs out because I didn't want to think about like aiming a big thing
Oh
around. It
yeah, it
just I
looks
didn't
weird
need
too
that.
in 2D. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. And then it just sort of turned into what it became because it was like, okay, how do I make this interesting? Rewind is sort of the player's strength, and rewind exemption is sort of it could be a weakness of the monster. Like it naturally is that. Like, oh, he can't get his hit points back. Like what? Okay. Like you could think of other ways to do a boss. Like maybe there's someone who could rewind also or something. But then that gets into like heavily scripted weird gameplay, and I
Mm.
wanted something that was just like a phenomenon, right? So the basic phenomenon of rewindability is like, okay, if you have a counter on something, that counter will not reverse. So if it's hit points, it just goes down and never up. And it's weird because like that's actually how most games are already. But in this game, it's interesting because it wouldn't have been that way unless we made it that way. Like it's very strange because if I just have exactly this level in a game that didn't have rewind, it's not an interesting level. Now, of course,
It
in
would be
order to do
impossible
that,
to
it's
pass.
like okay, you would have to have more ammo to hit the boss with, right? So that's the other thing that's interesting is there's two chandeliers. The chandeliers, by the way, why are they chandeliers? Because I felt like I wanted in the game to at least do, there's the whole thing about entropy going in one direction and things, come apart and don't go together very easily. And I wanted just like a visual of that in the game because
Mm.
I wouldn't feel like the game explored this very well without that. But I like the idea of having something break apart and come together. And so it gives us something to call back to at the end of the game. Then, of course, it's like, okay, well, it's not only the
That's
boss's
why the
weakness, but it's like,
chandeliers
it's
are
also how
here,
you
the
get more
entropy.
ammunition to fight the boss is by using rewind. So it's not exactly a level that you could do in another game, right? But it's just the boss's hit points being irreversible is interesting even though it totally isn't in every other game in the world. And I don't know, that was fun. So these are the two places in the game that have like HUDs that come up, right? So there's the monster hunt level where it like checks off the monsters.
Oh yeah.
Why is that in the game, right? Like that's the rest of the game doesn't have that. The game isn't about going through different modes. It was like, well, early on I didn't know what the game was about and I thought that would be an interesting thing to do. And then as I figured out the game with the monster hunt, it stayed interesting because I was able to do something really cool with it in World 4 and tie them together, right? And that made it well worth keeping, even though it's weird, right? So with the boss, again, this HUD comes up with hit points, which we could got rid of because I put horns on him that fly off because
Yeah.
that's the better game design thing to do or whatever. But then I thought maybe that's too subtle. So it has both now, which is redundant and maybe a little bit bad for the reason of redundancy.
Hardest puzzle game. Alternative designed for the high jump puzzle. And should we help the player get closer to the solution?
All right. So next world, World 5. I think I remember that's the one that I got a little bit stuck on because you can have, I don't know how you call those monsters, Goombas or something. You can have them jump on your head, and that's hard to discover, kind of.
It's one of the interesting possibilities that is enabled by, the mechanic of having a ghost dude who your game isn't over, she dies, right? Like you probably had monsters bounce on your head before and saw that happen. It's just
No,
it's a game
it
ending
didn't. It
criteria,
didn't
or
happen.
you have to rewind from there, so you don't think that much about it. Well, you need to actually use that, right? And That's probably my favorite puzzle in the game, actually, because there's nothing there. You look at the level and it's just like there's a platform pretty high up and there's just like a big gap. It would almost be better if it's on a level all by itself because it would be clearer. Because it's so like, sometimes these are my favorite moments in puzzle games where you just look at something and you say, no, I see everything there is to see here. And it clearly, I can tell you why this is impossible. Right. And then you're like, oh, wait, actually, it was possible. Those moments are some of the best in puzzle games too. And they're very rare. And that is one of them. But I do feel like if I were to redesign the game from scratch, maybe that's on its own level because it might be too easy at that point. Right. But yeah. So the one on the left is actually also, it's sort of about falling, right? In the sense that like you kind of have to be here and then fall and rewind because there's not really a good other way to do this. You kind of have to do this, but there it's sort of about the player and the monster going through or whatever. This is about don't let the monster fall down. And so the platform has to be on both sides of the gap. But over here, we kind of need him to fall off one side because the whole point is you can't get over on the right. And it's more strong if you just have this platform and there's literally nothing around it. If there was like a ceiling over it and I could run back and forth and I just almost could get there, but like it's tweaky and dumb that I just can't momentum myself in the right way and I need the monster for that. That is a much weaker puzzle, right? Whereas this is much stronger. It's just like that is way over there. And I don't know what I'm supposed to do about that. And that's why it's one of my favorite puzzles in the game, if not my favorite. Like maybe that would have just been better is if you go into this room and there's just a really high platform and that's it. Well, I mean, there has to be more. There has to be monsters coming out of a cannon that, fall some distance somewhere. But that might have been a better level, actually. Like I do generally try to frame things that are related on the same level. That happens a lot, obviously. Sometimes it's harder to tell why things are related if you're not me. Um, in this particular one, it's like about the monster falling, right? It's like in the one, so monster comes out of a cannon. To solve one of the puzzle, you actually have to prevent him from falling by like filling both halves of a gap, right? Or you don't have to exactly do that, but that's the easiest way to do it. So you want him to not fall, but then you do want him to like fall I mean it's in a different place, so it's not that clear. Like if he actually fell through that gap, again, that might be a better level. Okay. There's different things to go for. If I were going for just the absolute magic moment, it might be putting, as mentioned, the big jump on its own level. Although, like the thing with covering the platform or covering the gap with a platform is a little bit magical. It's like not as strong. But so maybe they should both be on the same level. But you could imagine changing it so that you emphasize the duality instead of like, I want it to be in the player's mind clearly that I want the monster to not fall, but I want the monster to fall for a different thing. And then the level would sort of be focused around that pit. One thing I will say about that level is it is kind of complicated for what it is. There's like just some little walls and whatever, and it probably could be simpler. In the interview with Mark, we talked about separating this high jump puzzle into its own level to decrease confusion and to increase focus. This is what that might look like. And I think this version might have made the original game better, but The game as a whole consists of many levels with multiple puzzles on them and only a few levels with single puzzles. If I change this level to have only one puzzle, it would shift the game further in the direction of single puzzle levels, which would change how the game feels overall. But you could do that. You could imagine redesigning the whole game to have one puzzle per level. The result would feel pretty different, I think. Some puzzles would be easier due to increased clarity and focus, and that's probably good. But the game would also feel more like other generic puzzle games, which often have one puzzle per level. And some other basic functional things about the game would get uglier. For example, on the cloud screens, we would need to have a big row of 12 doors every time.
Yeah, I don't know about that one puzzle idea. This works nicely because that's like one cannon for each puzzle. And there's also like a star you can get. It's like an extra thing.
What do you think of the idea of making it more obvious that it's about a monster jumping on your head? Like maybe, yeah.
No, I don't like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I can say a couple things to start that I'm sure you've heard me say, but then maybe we can get into something interesting new, right? So firstly, a puzzle is something you might not solve, right? So like that's what makes it a challenge, is because if I don't do a good job, I won't be able to solve the puzzle, right? And some people take this attitude, like I hate puzzle games where like 10 seconds after you enter the level, it says, oh, you haven't gone that far yet. Let me give you a hint. Like those timers are always set so short whenever people do that. It drives me nuts, right? I have heard specifically the rationale that we want everybody to be able to finish the game and solve all the main, and maybe there's some hard puzzles off to the side, but we want everybody to finish this game. And to me, that's not really a puzzle game anymore, because the depth of appreciation depends on how hard you actually thought about it, or how much, let's not even use the word hard. Like, how deeply did you think about what's happening in this level? How much did you run through permutations in your mind about what could be interesting about it? Then you come out of it with an appreciation. And the more that you just see the answer and do it, the less that happened, right? And so, well, okay, to get back to your actual question, I just like the magic that I see in that puzzle. And part of the magic, like I said, is from going from this is impossible to I see how to do this. If I tell you how it's possible, not even how to do it, but if I say, oh, imagine the little dinosaur showed up and said, try to get the monster to bounce off your head, right? That's the stupid version of it. I could put a sign saying, beware of falling monsters or something, right?
Okay. Can I just stop you?
I know you wouldn't do
solutions.
You wouldn't do
No,
that.
but I'm like, okay, maybe a compromise is you make a little pit where the monster has to fall on your head, and it's right before this puzzle, so it kind of gives you a hint without actually like giving you the answer, and it puts it more in your mind, because like in the Witness you do all these things where it's like a build-up of the idea, and here you could conceivably say that that's a possibility.
I guess, I mean, honestly, I didn't think about it that hard at the time because I just loved what I came up with. But if I were to think about it now, okay. So you mentioned before, we have these little cubby holes that the monsters walk into and get a key. That's sort of like at some point now. Okay. So you mentioned before, we have these little cubby holes that the monsters walk into and get a key. That's sort of like at some point, it's a visual shorthand in this game of like, you have to get a monster to this point. And we don't have that many other ways to require a monster to be somewhere. There's not pressure plates even or anything in this game. You could design a puzzle. Okay, like you said, you go down in a pit and a monster can come out of a cannon and you can re-stomp him and he comes out again. And maybe he's going right to left. He falls down in the pit. And then if you stand in the right place, he'll bounce off your head onto a little bit of a platform to make it an easy thing to hit. And then the platform like goes into one of the little cubby holes and he gets a key out for you. Okay, that would be an okay puzzle probably, because it wouldn't be totally obvious, but that wouldn't feel magical to me, that puzzle. It would be more like, oh, okay, I see what I have to do here. It would be a little bit cool and magical because as you do have to use your rewind guy to do that. And that's neat, right? Like it's essentially the same puzzle as the harder one, but with more things, which makes it not as good because there's like a key that there also has to be a gate somewhere. So there's a gate that gets you to the part of the level that has the harder thing on it, right? But that's, you know, which one of the reasons why I do video games and like puzzle video games and games with trippy ideas and mechanics and themes and whatever is like I just have some aesthetic that I like of transcending normal everyday human understanding, right? Of like observing some true thing or beautiful thing that is normally quite far away from us. Like imagine you can't space travel, but there's something just really far away off in some part of the universe where you can't even understand, but you figure out how to go there or see it or something. It's something like that. And this World 5 puzzle, the one that actually exists that we've been talking about, is like that to me. It's like far away, but you can get there in an instant, right? It's not a lot of steps. Now, the version that has the cubby hole and the key and the pit, that other puzzle, in making it easier, it is more encumbered and more Earth-like, more earthy. It's not, it's, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not magical and transcendent. And then also, in the process of solving the harder one, you're not making as big of a leap because we brought you, now there's a space station somewhere. And okay, you went off to some mildly new place, but like we sort of also provided some resources in the middle for you to like stock up and hang out. And like, that's good if you want an easier game, but it does remove the magic for me. And this is not me saying that I think harder is better always, but harder is better sometimes. Or even harder, I don't even think harder is the operative thing here because this puzzle is kind of hard, but if I could make it easier without sacrificing other parts of it, I probably would somehow. I just don't know how to do that, right? And then as we mentioned a minute ago, if it's too easy, then maybe it's not good because your mind didn't engage with it.
Yeah, I wished the Brian Moriarty lecture, another one, on I See What I Did There, I think it was called, yeah. The sound quality was horrible, but he has a pretty nice charisma. Still liked it. Like explaining his experience with the witness. Okay, what is going on here? Oh, okay, I see. So this is what he was talking about?
Mark suggested making the puzzle easier by hinting that you need to make a monster bounce off your head. Here's the idea I came up with during that discussion.
That would not be a
It
bad
works,
idea.
but it's pretty ugly because of the weird geometry and the way the player is
No,
almost
it's
trapped
fine.
on the left side of the level. In the rest of the game, you can just walk to the next level anytime you're stuck, except, of course, in the boss levels, where being locked in is part of the drama. So locking the player in here
because
on a
it's
normal
locked.
level is really
Okay.
not great. Not only because we're blocking the player's ability to experiment, but because we're diluting the uniqueness of the boss levels. One way that puzzle games end up being mediocre is when designers make stuff like this and just decide, hey, it's good enough. To really produce high quality work, you want to notice ugliness like this when it happens, to see all this weighty stuff has been added to the level, just to make an excuse to bounce a monster, and then ask yourself, can't I find a more elegant way to do this? Then you could try different ideas in your mind or in the level editor and judge to yourself whether they're becoming uglier or more beautiful. Every good puzzle designer I know practices this aesthetic sense in some way. The good news is that there isn't an objectively correct answer, which means you can develop your own personal voice and style. But without some strong idea of what's good that is reality-based to some degree, you won't really be able to make good puzzles.
I think this one is good because it's not very clear that you can bounce, that they can bounce off your head. Like, it never really happened to me in my first playthrough, so that's why I was so stuck on that puzzle, because I had no idea that could even be a possibility. Until I just been doing like a random stuff very long time, and it just happened eventually. I think like if this kind of mini level was somewhere in the same world, it would be nicer. Or like some kind of level that hints on that it's possible. Oh shit, there's more. To do that? Yeah, I might do that. So I need to get it up. Wait, okay, so he didn't get much of a jump there. Might not be the right thing. Yeah, the jump is so small. Too late. There's just not much time left. I'm not sure if that was the intentional way to do it, but here we go. Yeah, it's fine. If it was a way to avoid blocking the player from progressing, that would be nicer, but it's nice.
And so, related to the movement code, I know you said in one of your talks that you had to solve a partial differential equation to know something about the movement there,
Yeah, I don't know if it's a PDE. Like my differential equations are not that strong,
or
but it's
some sort of
the
differential
discrete.
equation.
So I did the discrete version,
Maybe not
which is
partial. Yeah.
a convergence series, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's when you're riding on clouds that are moving.
Yeah, that's what I thought it was. Yeah, and so the question I have about that is, was it scary that you might not be able to solve this
Yeah,
case?
it wasn't that scary because it's not like the whole game resides on whether this is mathematically true or not. It's just better if it is, right? Because players aren't going to know either way.
And you could have cut that part, you think? Or if it didn't work at all? Or
Yeah, I would have cut it if it didn't work. At first, okay, like I think I solved the equation wrong at first anyway, and I thought it converged for some speeds and then diverged for other speeds. And so I was going to make something out of that where you have clouds that go faster. I was like, how do I do this in the game? Maybe there's clouds that go faster and faster until you get
mm,
on one and like it throws you off the level, or who even knows,
hmm.
right? I didn't get that far.
And you were interested in this probably just because it looked cool, or just there was something about,
Well, it's
It's a
another
neat concept.
consequence that you have to explore.
yeah.
Like, look, if time moves based on your position, well, one of the things you can do in this game is ride on things. So you have to define that anyway, right?
Mm,
If we don't have you ride on something in this world, that's weak sauce, first of all. So then what happens? You could imagine a few things that happen. So you could imagine I get on the platform. Because the platform has speed moving to the right, I'm moving to the right, therefore time goes forward because I'm on the platform, right? And then maybe if I run left, depending on the speed of the platform, maybe I can get closer to time stopping or something. That could be a little interesting, but it seemed very limited to me. Like you could do maybe a few puzzles about, the platform goes at like exactly walking speed. So if you run left, time stops, but only because you're still running off the platform. But I guess you would have to get up to acceleration because I guess the platform would stop moving. It's weird. You need to sort of define like, is there a feedback loop there or not? I thought about that for a little bit and I didn't like it because it just made it more like the rest of the game. So yeah, it's kind of interesting that I have a little bit more of an analog speed control over the rate at which time happens. But that's not even that interesting because the same things are still happening. It's like they're happening a little slower, they're happening a little faster. We have that in World 6. So you end up re implementing the same effect in a different way, which none of that seemed very good to me. I like the thing about World 4, the way it feels is it's still, right? It's like kind of frozen until you move. And I felt like there was going to be enough to do with that should just be the way that it works, is that it really is whether you are moving. But now, okay, does that mean when you're moving you should ignore platform speeds? That would result in like physics that is pretty different from the rest of the game because platforms don't slip out from under you in the game, right? And so I ended up with this balance where it's like, okay, time moves based on movement initiated by you, right? But that is momentum movement influenced by what you're riding on and stuff. And that seems to work well for that level, but it is by no means the only way it could have been executed, right?
Uh,
So now I'm going sort of back to more general questions. And what's interesting, I think, is when you make a game like that, you have all these elements. Like you have the cannons, the rabbits, the flowers, and it's sort of this big tapestry that needs to like everything needs to be used more than once and it has to make sense, but it still needs to be like there's a reason why you made it up in the first place, and that probably is stronger than the reason why you're trying to reuse it. Like it always feels like you're stretching the material to like catch other things, but there's this whole big structure that you're trying to build, and I was wondering if you had any trouble with parts of that. It's a very general question, but maybe that brings something to mind.
With figuring out what the base elements were or with
Yeah.
stretching the
Yeah,
elements?
like you were like, okay, like this is not used, so I should try to reuse it more.
I mean, the thing that we just mentioned about World 1 is a little bit of that, where it's like, it just turns out a lot of these things are not useful in World 1, and so ideally I might have somehow started with different things.
Right. Yeah.
Although most of the things that I think about maybe don't matter that much. So that's, I mean, I do think like the bunny rabbits they're a little bit, it's a weird thing because I wouldn't want to delete them from the game because then maybe there isn't enough stuff after that. Like again, they came from like I want a harder enemy that you're more scared of or whatever, right? And that's fine, but it's not really what the game's about. It came from this early time. Like, okay, so on the one hand, I did know that this game was about I'm stuff and that I wanted to be focused on that, but I still like was having fun making a game and got excited about non-time stuff. Like, oh, there's going to be a boss with a big gun who like shoots it, or I need a more complicated enemy. Isn't it funny if it's kind of like the bunny rabbit from Monty Python and the Holy Grail? But we're not going to just like clone that, but like it's just a little bit funny to do to call back to that in some very vague way, right? So that's kind of
Monty
what that
Python
is,
and
and it's
Holy
like it's not
Grail?
actually super deep, but it was good enough to build the game with. And then once I built the game,
That's
I'm
what
like,
it
well,
was inspired
I don't know how to replace that with something better, right? So it is what it is. And I think pretty much every game is like that. Every game that I've ever done was like that, where you make decisions early on and those just shape what the thing is in the end. And then by the time you're in a place to maybe question those decisions, it is too late in terms of the thing that you've explored. Like that stone is in the foundation of the thing that you built. And
That's true.
you can't do a lot about it. Except try again next time now that you're a better designer, right?
Watch this.
You have this option to pause time completely instead of going back and forth. And was that I would guess it was controversial to make, because to me it almost feels more fun to go back and forth and more about the time, but it makes it much easier when you can just pause it and just wait for things to happen. And it's also not very discoverable.
This is new, right?
Yeah, I mean, the way that happened was just in the very beginning, there was just rewind at 1x speed, and then you stop rewinding and the game goes forward again. And there are some situations when you want to rewind a lot, right? So that's why there's speed adjustment. But then also, it doesn't feel that good. Like if you try playing and just rewind at 1x and then forward at 1x. Now, the 0x time speed just came from, well, okay, if you can rewind fast, you maybe miss what you were going to do. So you should be able to go back forward. And then if you can go back forward at 1x, well, we should probably have symmetry. And then do you go from -1 to 1, or is there a 0 in the middle? And it just seemed better to have a 0 in the middle. It does make a lot of things easier.
Yeah.
But again, I think a lot of players don't get that.
I see.
Right,
so it cancels
it's like
out.
well, and it adds kind of skill ceiling to the game. It adds an advanced technique that you can use. And so, for example, there's one puzzle in the game where
What?
it adds an advanced technique that you can use. And so, for example, there's one puzzle in the game where the plants popping up and down, and you're trying to get them in a certain phase with each other. And it's a little bit hard because you can mess up, right? Because the extent of your time ring goes really far, right? There's at least 3 ways to solve it. You can do this very laborious brute force thing until you kind of get the thing that you want. There's a more elegant thing that you can do that's just a few moves where you drop the ring in the right place and you get the guys in the right sequence. And then they're timed so that as the monster walks, the guys go up and down with the right timing, right? The elite ninja move to do is just sync them all with each other and then stop time while they're all in the floor. And I like that because it's like, oh, the more mastery you have of this game, the more you can take this puzzle that seems really hard and like have an expert solution. Many puzzles that doesn't happen, but when I was able to do it, I liked it.
Pretty sure it's the new stuff. Unless I just never found it out. Oh wait, yeah, that's exactly what it's for. That's clever. Fuck. Fuck. There we go.
This level is new for the Anniversary Edition.
No way.
Toward the end, as we were tightening things up, I went back and revised this level in a small but nice way that seems fun to talk about here. Here's the original design. Note that there's a hole here just to the right of the rewind exemption platform. That was there because if there's no hole, you can get on the platform and rewind to the beginning and then let go of rewind, which would cause you to be stuck in the closed off portion of the level.
I have no
Yes,
idea
the
what
player
you're talking
could go
about.
to the menu and exit the level that way, but this is bad form,
And I haven't
especially
played it
when
yet.
adding a level to Braid, which never trapped you like this. The tiny gap on the left is there just so that the monster turns around and doesn't leave the tunnel. He stays in there to block you from getting the puzzle piece, and if he came out, you could jump over him, leaving him alive, and get in there. That tunnel is just tall enough to walk in, but not jump, because if you could jump, then you could kill the monster in there, which ruins the puzzle. If the gap on the left were wider, you'd need to jump to get across it, so it has to be tiny. Since I couldn't make the gap on the left wider, I added the gap on the right, which has to be inside the vault door so that you can get out if you rewind the door shut. But I hated doing this because I wanted the level to be focused around this room.
Okay, wait, no. I have no idea what he's talking about. Well, yeah, I could use the rewind immunity. What? No. Fuck. No, I don't think that's. Yeah, that's not enough. But it's almost enough. So I need to kill. Need to kill it? What can I do? If I stay here. It's just going. Just to go back, I guess. Probably that's what he was talking about. Okay, well. How? Because the cannon is not immune to rewind. The cannonball is not immune to rewind. How am I going to pass the cannonball? Wait, I guess I need to kill it, like, manually here. Oh yeah, well. I did it. Wait, what? Back. Shit. Okay, rewind it too far. What? Wait, what? Oh, it's... Oh, another one.
but I hate jump. You never realized this level is new for the Anniversary Edition. Toward the end, as we were tightening things up, I went back and revised this level in a small but nice way that seems fun to talk about here. Here's the original design. Note that there's a hole here just to the right of the rewind exemption platform. That was there because if there's no hole, you can get on the platform and rewind to the beginning and then let go of rewind, which would cause you to be stuck in the closed off portion of the level. Yes, the player could go to the menu and exit the level that way, but this is bad form, especially when adding a level to Braid, which never trapped you like this. The tiny gap on the left is there just so that the monster turns around and doesn't leave the tunnel. He stays in there to block you from getting the puzzle piece, and if he came out, you could jump over him, leaving him alive, and get in there. That tunnel is just tall enough to walk in, but not jump, because if you could jump, then you could kill the monster in there, which ruins the puzzle. If the gap on the left were wider, you'd need to jump to get across it, so it has to be tiny. Since I couldn't make the gap on the left wider, I added the gap on the right, which has to be inside the vault door, so that you can get out if you rewind the door shut. But I hated doing this because I wanted the level to be focused around this room that is an enclosed space that is defined by one door or the other being shut. And adding a gap makes it seem less like an enclosed space. I tried a few alternatives back then and just couldn't figure anything out. So I gave up and called it finished with the gap there on the right. In the revised version, I realized that I could use a short ladder that you can drop down but not climb up, which should have been obvious to me before, but just wasn't. I positioned this ladder so that it's symmetric with the ladder on the right, and tweaked the size of the central platform to work better with the graphics that had been added. Then we revised the art to add a background for the central room to make it feel more closed. I am much happier with this revised level, not only because it better emphasizes the closedness of the room, but because it removes an annoying asymmetry that the player might trip over. You had to jump over that hole to get to the central platform, and there's a cannonball coming, so you have to worry about that at the same time. And why? It's just a dumb escape hole that the player probably doesn't even need. It would have been one improvement just to replace this hole where it was with the drop-down ladder. But it's two improvements to also then combine that ladder with the monster gap on the left. In doing so, we have turned 2 points of interest into just one, which simplifies the level and reduces the number of places the player puts attention. The more you can simplify the level, the stronger it will be. These changes might not seem like a big deal, but iterated improvements of this kind are often the difference between an okay game and a really good game.
Oh, that was sharp. Nice.
These are excerpts from an interview by Brian Moriarty, the designer of classic adventure games Loom and Trinity, among others. Trinity was an especially formative game for me. As a teenager, I had played and enjoyed almost all of the Infocom text adventures on home computers. These were my favorite kind of game at the time, and Trinity, I felt, was by far the best of them. It put an impression into my mind of what a game could be like that was very refined and deliberate in its artistic sensibilities. Many years later, when I went to make Braid, Trinity served as a guiding image of what I was trying to achieve, though it had to do this in a very vague, misty way, as the two games are very different in form.
What the hell is this? Flying chunk. Oh. Okay. Whoa. Okay, this is much more deeper. This is like a bit of physics involved too. No, wait. Yeah, it's not actually inertia. I thought. Or is it? I don't know. It doesn't kick him like far. Whoa. Did he make it specifically to unknowing? Moriarty because he's bad with controls. He did. So okay, efficiency packing and displaying hand-drawn. Efficiently packing and displaying hand-drawn 2D images.
There are two things you want to do that are related. In 3D rendering, especially back then, right? Even though this game is 2D, it was running on 3D rendering hardware, as it is still. One of the things that's very slow when you're using this kind of hardware is changing what bitmap you're drawing all the time, because I'm just going to say stuff that won't make sense to people who aren't programmers, but there's a very deep pipeline where the GPU is doing a bunch of things in parallel. And especially back then, much less so now, if you want to do something drastic like change what texture we're reading from, you basically have to like flush the pipeline, wait for all the current computations to finish, and then, and it's also just slow for your program to talk to the GPU and stuff. And so if you're going to draw, let's say 1,000 rectangles on the screen, I don't actually know how many we do per frame in old Braid. Let's just say 1,000 as a number, right? That takes a lot of time. If you have to switch textures every single time, that's a lot slower than if you can draw, 50 rectangles all with the first texture and then another 50 with the second texture and so forth. Now, one thing that you often do in 3D, especially when you're drawing opaque objects, is you sort by texture. And again, this is a little bit of an older thing that people do less now, but you would sort by texture, you batch all these things together, you send them all to the GPU, and then you do the next ones. Now in 2D, it's actually not even that easy, because we need to draw from back to front, because we have in this game all this translucency everywhere. Even things that are mainly opaque have, because it's drawn with a paintbrush that has a little bit of translucency at the edges. But also the look of Braid is that there's like a lot of sky pieces and a lot of particles and all these things that just blend together. And so you can't draw things out of order. There's two things that we needed to do. We needed to draw back to front, first of all, but then also as many things as we can draw at one time that have the same texture. We draw those in batches. So for a given level, that means that as many, like if there's a bunch of art that we think is going to be present in one level, we want to pack those into the same textures so that we don't have to switch them. And we didn't do like a super serious analysis where you could imagine like solving some constraint problem where you make absolutely sure that the things that happen to be in order on this level are definitely next to each other in the texture, but that would involve, some output from the editor.
Yeah, spreadsheets.
And then it changes when you edit the level and all this stuff, right? So instead, it's just more like generally, like look, and especially back then, because the art wasn't super high resolution, it wasn't that bad to say like, okay.
What res was this rent made for? Then 2K?
So the Xbox 360 was 720p. Maybe it could do 1080, but it was infeasible for most games to even try that.
So you at 720.
Yeah, we were targeting 720p at that time. And so if your source textures are 1024 by 1024, which a lot of them were, and if a lot of the pieces are rendered slightly bigger than 1:1, which especially the background sky stuff was, you could fit a lot of stuff in the level into a relatively small number of textures. And so we just sort of do that. And so the job of this tool that I made, which was called the pieced image maker, because pieced image was like the file format. It's like, look at the Photoshop layers, pack them into these textures, and then make a little output file that tells the editor, here's some name like, Rocky Platform A, and that is n rectangles.
An index.
Yeah, it's n rectangles, and these are the coordinates of them
In the texture.
Right. But also then in like relative to some origin, right? And so then you can drag that thing around as one object, and it's like multiple rectangles. I'm sure other 2D systems probably have something similar. It's just like a thing that you want. And I'll say for people who don't know this stuff, the reason you want to do that, imagine you have a very simple shape like a big L shape or like a corner, right? Well, you want to economize on texture space, and which makes the file size of the game smaller and also allows you to pack more things into one GPU texture. So you don't want to store a bunch of transparent pixels that aren't going to impact anything on the screen. But if you have like this giant L shape and you treat it as a rectangle enclosing the L, which is the dumbest, simplest thing to do, it's, 85% waste in transparent pixels, in file size, and actually also in GPU time, because your GPU will spend time blending these 0 pixels with everything else, right? And so it's a great benefit to not do that. And even more so on older computers, right? So that is all just to say that this format that was this, here's a bunch of rectangles glued together that you could drag around in the editor, was a thing that we developed in response to the art process that David was doing. And before that, the programmer art didn't do that. The programmer art was mostly just rectangle with a bitmap on it, and you could stretch it around, right? And so those are kind of very different things.
You get there. I tried. Maybe some kind of secret platform way above. Yeah, there's no way you can do it. But I already tried. It didn't work. Okay, well, let's continue with the theory.
Is your just quick technical procedural thing? Is your method that the programmer art and the final art produced by the artist is a drop-in replacement, literally?
Oh, no, not at all.
Oh, so it's you had to reprogram.
I had to do a lot of extra programming. And so the game was totally working, for example, without any kind of parallax scrolling in the background. It was 1-to-1.
Right.
And just going from that to the parallax version with all these particle systems and stuff was a bunch of extra programming.
Yeah.
And we sort of did that over time as David did the art.
Yeah, that part I understand, but I mean, you didn't produce placeholder art for the parallax scrolling, right? So there couldn't be a drop-in replacement.
Yeah. Well, even so with these chandeliers, for example, we were working out the system by which we represent all these graphics in the game. And what I did was, David has like a Photoshop file. He's drawing the things in Photoshop. The way Photoshop works is there's a bunch of layers, right? And you can enable and disable visibility on them and all
I've been
these
using
things.
it since 1990.
Yep. And so we had this exporter. So rather than exporting bitmaps to some other format, right, we have an exporter that looks at the Photoshop file, looks at the layers, right, finds the sort of the bounding box of what pixels are set in that layer, possibly chops it into smaller pieces, both because there was a maximum texture size in those days, right, which is variable based on platform, but we could be like, well, we don't want any pieces to be bigger than 256 pixels wide or something.
My first inkling of why you had sent me this Braid game was when I was playing and came upon a level that has a level with a large, suspiciously oriental-looking monster occupying a chamber with 2 chandeliers. But then yesterday you told me that this puzzle with its 2 chandeliers and the monster was actually in the game very, very early.
It was, yeah.
Long before you had explicitly put in the A-bomb references.
Yeah, it was something like, it was one of the early prototypes, something like,
You can't rewind
in the
me.
first couple weeks of development.
So that's
now
creepy.
die, puny little man.
Maybe. I mean,
That's
it depends.
creepy.
It depends on how
Wait,
accurate,
what?
in the first couple weeks of development.
So that's creepy.
Creepy.
Maybe. I mean,
That's
it depends.
creepy.
It depends on how accurate you believe your interpretation is, and or
I think
what your model of
by
causality
far not
in the
the only
universe is.
person to have seen the parallel here.
I mean, yeah, it depends. How do you think the universe works?
Oh, so no, are we asking how that thing could happen? Oh, how How far do we want to go?
I mean,
What are they talking about?
The
What's
A-bomb
creepy about?
references. Chandeliers and the monster was actually in the game very, very early.
it was, yeah.
Long before you had explicitly put in the A-bomb references.
Oh,
Yeah, it was
Atomic
something
bombs.
like, it was one of the early prototypes. Something like, in the first couple weeks of development.
So that's creepy.
Maybe. I mean,
That's
it depends.
creepy.
It depends on how accurate you believe your interpretation is, and or
I think
what your
not
model of
going
by
so
far
causality.
not
in
the
universe
only
is.
person to have seen the parallel here.
I mean, yeah, it depends. How do you think
I
the
feel like
universe
it's a
works?
coincidence. Like it has
Oh,
nothing to do.
so no, are we asking how that thing could happen? Oh, how far do we want to go into this, John?
Well, I would like to.
I mean, this
I
is.
would like to
You want to
stick
talk
with-
about
That's
causality?
funny.
I would like to stick with specifics of the game. for a
Okay,
while.
somebody pointed out, I had not noticed it, the images embedded into the chandeliers.
Mhm.
It has a figure, a woman looking at two men on either side of her, kind of in a repose, very similar to the Andromeda pose in some ways. Well, one thing it does is when the chandeliers break, there is a clear separation between the man and one of the men and the woman and the man. There's a breakup. There's literally a breakup there. So you're using your personal
Interesting.
relationship metaphor is brought in even here,
Yeah.
right? So that's cool. I don't know when you. I mean, so was that who put that in? Did you tell the artist put that in?
I feel like David did that without prompting from me, but you also have to remember he was working on the game for a long time and knows what it's about.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's one of those things where he did that, and I was like, yeah, that's good, maybe. But again, I don't
So I
promise.
understand
this.
this.
What do you mean
have
maybe?
20,000 decisions to make a day, and you don't kind of remember the whole chain.
Yeah. I mean, I actually could probably, a lot of this correspondence was email because he was working remote for the majority of this, but we did meet once in a while in San Francisco and work. So like, it's quite possible that this discussion happened in person too.
But that's. I just wanted to point out to the listeners who may not have caught
Doesn't
what I
even
said
remember
there.
that.
You claimed that the A-bomb stuff was a late edition, yet this was an early edition, and to me, at least, the parallel here, the visual reference is pretty easy to see. I mean, did you know subliminally or unconsciously that this was, or what do you think? How would you account for that?
I mean, I will
It
not.
could be pure coincidence.
I will not attempt to say anything about this specific thing, right? But broadly speaking, when I make games,
It may have been on your mind, and
okay, in the same way that, okay, if you're a player of a game, in the same way that your subconscious mind, whatever that is, helps you solve puzzles, however it does. Well, when you're making a game, you're basically trying to solve a very huge, very difficult puzzle, right? And fortunately, it's a puzzle with multiple solutions, but some of the solutions are a lot better than other ones. And in any case, it's very hard to solve because of all the pieces and how they connect together and the ramifications of moving one thing on the other things. So because it's a big, difficult puzzle, we should not be surprised that you wake up in the morning sometimes and know the answer to something, or maybe you used to think something was the right decision, and then one day you realize, I haven't really thought about this in a while, but I'm pretty sure that's the wrong thing to do now, and I should instead do this other thing, right? That happens with me a lot, right? And there's two opposite ends of a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum there's a very well-defined situation. Like I have a certain scene in the game, and it's got these chandeliers in it or something, and whatever. I need to figure out how many hit points the boss should have. What's the right answer there? It's a very specific, well-honed-in scenario. So sometimes you think through that rationally, like, if he has 93 hit points, that seems very tedious, right? And if he has one, I can't do the game mechanics, right? But in some of those cases that get more complex, intuition for me plays a role, for sure. Now, the other end of this spectrum is just deciding what to do when you're in an open-ended situation. It's like, I don't know what goes here at all. Like, I have to figure out what is a good game going to be vis-a-vis this thing. Like, imagine that you have the beginning and the ending of a game, and like, okay, what's the middle?
Right.
That's a really big question.
That's exactly how I design my games.
Yeah.
With the beginning and the ending, and I have to. I guess I need the middle now.
Yeah,
How am I
but-
gonna get there?
But that's such a
why
big
in
question,
the games,
right?
like
And
the second act.
For
is-
me, that's when
And
intuition
movies
especially
always
comes into play, because the possibilities are so big and
underwhelming
so disparate.
often, I guess.
You can't really think about all of the
No.
possibilities.
I call this the dividing infinity problem.
Yeah. And this is something that probably every artist in every medium has to do. Like, how do you decide what to do?
And what not to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
We discussed a case where David came up with the details of how to handle chandelier breaking visually. And these details involved some thematic elements.
Well,
And I hadn't planned those out ahead of time, and I accepted what he did. This might sound like I'm not very deliberate about what goes in the game, but actually it's a good way to illustrate how my job as game director actually works with regard to disciplines that I don't do the hour-to-hour work of myself, such as graphics and sound. Games can be big and complicated. I found that in general, I can't myself have enough ideas to fill out the whole game, because when you want high-quality work containing painted art or sound or whatever, well, part of something being high quality is that it has ideas in it. And because I'm not a practitioner of these sub-disciplines, it is hard for me to have these ideas a priori. And if I did have all the ideas, that might be stifling for the people doing the work, because they would have no way to bring creativity to bear. And if there's no creativity involved, you might have a hard time finding good people to do the work. As the games I do have gotten bigger, this has become increasingly true, that I can't have all the ideas myself. So what I do as director is to filter the ideas. My job is to have a very strong image of what the game is trying to be in terms of mood and overall feel. And when ideas are compatible with this, they go in. And if they're incompatible, well, we have a conversation about how to revise the work to better fit the overall picture. In this role, my job is to check ideas and sometimes, maybe frequently, to say no. And I've learned that it's very important for me to say no when things are not quite right, otherwise the game can suffer. In the case of the chandelier, everything went very quickly because the work that was done cooperated with the overall picture of the game and helped support its major themes. So I could just integrate David's work directly without revision. Sometimes things don't go so well, and it's best to catch those early before people do too much wasted work. Because if things go far without being checked, and then you decide, hey, we have to redo large amounts of stuff, people can become pretty unhappy. David mentioned doing an initial, darker version of the World 3 art, and that we then had a discussion about it and changed direction. When I realized that it felt wrong for what I was trying to do with the game, this seemed like a pretty uncomfortable conversation to have. There was a fair amount of art done for World 3 already, and it's a pretty negative thing to say, hey, stop, we have to redo this, and not use the work you've done on it so far, especially when you think the other party may not understand why you want to redo it, because what's there looks fine. Fortunately, David was a good sport about it, and before too long, we got to the current World 3. Since then, I've become familiar with this kind of activity. It's a basic part of my job and happens a couple of times every game. If you're trying to make something that feels well put together, while successfully doing something subtle with mood or theme, it can actually be quite delicate, and it's easy for a bad ingredient to ruin the soup. Someone has to be tasting the soup and occasionally say, no, this ingredient isn't the right one to get where we are trying to go. Another such conversation came up later on that was even harder. Before David had come on the project, when I was having a hard time finding an artist to do everything, I worked for a bit with Edmund McMillan, who has since become well known for games such as The Binding of Isaac and Super Meat Boy. Back then, both he and I were unknown, He was working on other projects with the majority of his time, but he did art and animation for all the characters, which was very helpful in terms of making the game something better looking that people could actually play. After this, David came onto the project and did a larger volume of art for all the level's foreground and background objects. This took quite a while, and when it was done, I felt like I had a serious problem in that the game's overall art style was not coherent. Edmund's art is in a cartoony style, and David's looks like you see today, and the two just didn't mesh well together. They didn't create a uniform feel. I agonized over this for a bit, then said, "Hey, David, we need you to paint over Edmund's stuff in order to make the visuals uniform." And I informed Edmund of this as well. Most of the resulting characters hew closely to Edmund's designs, except for Tim, for whom we went through several revisions because I felt his look was key to the mood of the game. I felt bad that we painted over Edmund's stuff, but with years of hindsight, it was still clearly the right decision. But I suspect that a lot of newer independent developers would not have conversations like this because they're uncomfortable and may cause drama. It's
Yeah,
much safer just to avoid the
completely
conflict
understand
and
that.
just roll ahead with the game that you have. But when it's the right thing for the game, you really should do it.
Wait, that's something different? Well, there's like, the ground is grayer, but I don't quite. Can I have like? No, the ground is the same. What is different? Huh. Fuck. Leave me alone.
I try not to lock things down until the last possible minute, but with graphic games, that's almost impossible to do. That was the great luxury of text adventures, is that we could change major things up to the very last minute.
Well, you know, on Braid, I replaced an entire level in the last 4 days.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
You replaced it or with
Yeah,
something
I
else?
redesigned it, and then David did the art real fast.
Wow.
It's the last level of World 6, the one with the cannon pointing vertically.
Yeah.
That used to be a less interesting, more complicated level.
And you decided at the last minute that it wasn't good enough. And
Yeah, I was like, I don't like this level. Let me see if I can do something else. And then I had the vertical cannon idea. And I honestly don't even remember what the old level was at this point. I just remember that. That was a
So
very late swap.
So at that point in the game, though, the process of building levels and making art was so well established that, you know, once you specified it, it wouldn't be, I imagine, that hard to make a change, or at least less hard than it would have been
No, I mean,
earlier.
you know, what the process looks like is I do the level with just rectangles where all the surfaces are and stuff. And then David already had the painting done for that world for all these pieces, right? And then he just arranges them. And so it was able to go very fast. But yeah, like that was, I didn't change a lot of levels in the last week, but like a lot of people would tell you that it's irresponsible to do something that big that late. But the history of games is full of these things, actually.
I would retort that it's irresponsible not to do it if you think it's going to make the game better.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it also you have to measure what is the possible fallout. How,
Of course.
if I make a mistake, how likely is it to be the kind of mistake that can be caught prior to release and all these things, right?
Right.
But this I judged, and in fact, like I knew that this was a ridiculous and or funny thing to do with like 4 days left before we go into cert, so I wanted to do it even more. Yeah, good times.
I mean, I had many experiences, not with the text games, but with Loom, where very late I saw opportunities, but it was just too late. It's just I couldn't if I asked Gary Winnick for one more bobbin animation, he was going to find a shovel and hit me on the head on it until I was dead. Right. So, and the clock was ticking, and the game was over budget and over time, and we had to get the damn thing out. So, I had to let a lot of, I think, nice little touches I could have added at the end had I had a magic wand, or there's some art in the game that I made. Yeah. Because I didn't dare ask the animators for it.
Yeah.
So I made it myself.
Yeah.
Right? Because I had to have it, and I couldn't ask them, so I had to make it myself. Then I spent, 18-hour days there, a lot, because of that.
Yeah.
But just it had to be as good as I could possibly make it. I looked terrible by the end, they tell me. I was like a gray ghost.
Wow.
It was hard. It's the hardest thing I ever did, I think.
It's video games, man.
Yeah, they're hard to make. So players, be gentle on us. We work so hard for you.
It's true. On the Xbox 360, it was really slow to load things off the so-called disc because as an Xbox Live Arcade, this was a thing that was different for Xbox Live Arcade than the rest of it. They had some like extra compressed package format that was, I think, only originally meant for save games or maybe patches. So it had extra security or something. But then the way Xbox Live Arcade was implemented, all data came from that. But the point being, loading data once you were running was way slower than it was for like a AAA game that you bought from the store. And so my approach on that platform was we simply don't load anything after startup. And so the songs were compressed, OGG format, but I would keep the whole thing resident in memory and then uncompress pages as I play them. And then the absurd thing is graphics were compressed. So on GPUs, even back then, you had a set of texture formats that the GPU is fast at decompressing. That's substantially smaller than the uncompressed bitmap would be, but because it has to be fast for the GPU to use, is also not like seriously compressed, right? So the compression ratio is not great. It might be like 6:1. Whereas JPEG might give you like 20, 30:1,
depending on how much loss you're willing to tolerate. Yeah.
Yes. As it happened, like 4:1 or 6:1 was not enough to fit the whole game, but 20:1 was. So the ridiculous thing that I did for the 360,
rather than just JPEGs, and then
all the bitmaps are in memory as JPEGs, and then when you use them on the GPU, I uncompress them to completely uncompress, because recompressing them to GPU formats takes time too. Yeah. And if you're doing it as you load the level, I don't want to do that. So it actually takes more RAM on the GPU than it should by a lot, because I'm trying to fit everything into memory the whole time. So that was fun.
Now to repeat this jump. I guess I could listen to something else.
Let's talk about music, one of my favorite things.
I like music.
Yeah. So in the original game, you chose what they call in the biz needle drop. Rather than go out and commissioning specific songs, you went out and found music that you liked, that you could license, and licensed it. That's cool. That's how Stanley Kubrick worked for most of his career. Any composer in the world would have been delighted to work for him, but he chose instead to use recordings. And you did not choose that for The Witness, because there's almost no music in The Witness, except for one glaring exception. But here you choose needle drop. So that was an economic choice, or did you consider commissioning music?
I mean, I probably thought about it a little bit. The thing to say before that is just, I was coming at everything in this game from the lens of, or the set of assumptions that, hey, I'm just some dude who's mainly a programmer and also has a lot of ideas about design, and I'm trying to make a game, and I want to successfully make it and release it. I don't know where I'm going to release it. And I had some definite preconceptions about how things work that may or may not have been accurate. to various degrees. One of them was licensing music is going to be super expensive. And one of them was I won't ever be able to get music on the terms that I would like.
Legal terms or?
Yeah, like, so I want to make art that lasts a long time. I want people to be able to play this game in 20 years or 50 years.
So you need perpetual rights.
You need perpetual rights. And my impression, which I'm still not sure if it's accurate or not, but back then it was, is that just as a small entity, there's no way you're going to get professional rights to any song you've heard of.
You mean any?
Because they won't.
Any mainstream pop song? Or just any music at all?
Well, here's an interesting thing.
Because there are companies that sell perpetual rights to, like Sound Dogs or many other places.
Oh yeah, that kind of stuff. Fine.
Yeah, I mean you can. That's plentiful, and you have full control over that.
So let's go back for a second, right? Aesthetically, in the game, right? I'm going into it. I'm saying this is an art game.
Okay, let's get back to. A rant about escapism.
It is very easy when talking about art with a capital A to like crawl too far up your own asshole and be lost up there and never get out, right? And as soon as we started this conversation, somebody listening to it thinks that has already happened, right? But again, like there is value in all these things, right? Even so, I'm not a big fan, for example, of the very concept of escapism. One thing that I got taught culturally, and that I think people believe even more today than when I was growing up, is that movies are escapism and books are escapism. And the reason they're so good is because they let you get away into an imaginary world, away from your life, which is surely must be terrible if you want to get away from it, right? And I have never liked that idea.
I think it's...
But not because it's completely wrong, simply because it's incomplete. Escapism actually is a valuable thing. People have a hard time sometimes. Sometimes they're so distraught or depressed that just getting through the next week, anything that helps you do that is valuable. And the world...
Be it a movie or a drink or three or whatever.
The world is so big and there are so many people in it that the number of people in that state at any one time, in fact, is a large number.
Probably the majority, actually.
So, from that standpoint, a certain amount of escapism is actually very helpful. It is one of the things that can help us live. For me, however, though, I think that if that is all that we do, if that is all that we use this technology of art for, we're kind of missing something because it can do a lot more. The way that I always used to think about it when I heard this escapism idea, which I probably first heard in high school or something, I contrasted it with my own experience and I was like, no, like I go to see a movie not because I want to get away from things, but I want to go towards something, right? I go to see a film or read a novel because I expect that the author has something to show me that will enrich my life or change it in a substantial way, and that I will come out of that I'm trying to find the right adjective. I wanted to say a larger person than I went in, which is certainly true if you eat movie theater popcorn and nachos, but larger in
a richer person, yeah.
Like understanding more, having a more nuanced view of the world,
yeah.
A little bit wiser, and these things. And that pursuit, however it takes place, both on the viewer side and on the author side, is really what I mean when I say art with a capital A. And I know that different people can have different definitions. But to me, anybody trying to push that forward, even if they have very different ideas of what is meaningful than I do, we're on the same team in some way. And there kind of ain't that many people on that team, is what I feel like.
The thing that, like, when I was playing Braid, when I play Braid, I don't think about, like, quantum mechanics. Like I'm trying to figure out the story, but it never really teaches me anything that would change my life at all. Maybe there is something, but it's like it's so convoluted and hidden that it's really hard to understand and really easy to misinterpret. So like this angle of, hey, this game is about like it's going to reveal something to you, something new. It's not quite true. Like there's some really good puzzles and like really good concepts you can get, learn and like experience, but it like has nothing to do with being more wise, I don't think. Might be better at game design
Aesthetically,
after this.
in the game, right? I'm going into it. I'm saying this is an art game. What does that mean? What do I want to bring to this game that hasn't been seen or isn't being done or that is atypical of other games? And there were a lot of different categories
Speed
of
of
answers,
faith.
but some of them are broadly aesthetic. So, for example, if you go back in time to older platformers, they have a very tile-based aesthetic because that's what you can do on an old computer.
That was
right?
their
Is
architecture. I mean,
yeah. You have a limited amount of memory. You maybe can't even address every individual pixel depending on what kind of system it is,
Right.
right?
But some of the handhelds, that's certainly true. Yeah.
And so that means things look a certain way. Well, now we're in a year when, that year being 2004 or whatever, when like those resource constraints no longer apply. And yet a lot of games are still descended from that aesthetic still. They're like influenced by it and carry it forward. So I was like, I don't want to see the same thing stamped out 5 times in a level. And for the most part, we avoided that. So one example that people probably usually don't notice, we've discussed this monster hunt level where there's little monsters on the top HUD, and as you jump on their head,
And they're
they get
a
X'd
little
out,
bit
right?
different.
Both the individual monsters and the X's through them are all different bitmaps. Whereas in an older game, it would be the same bitmap, right? And
It's a
that's a very
trivia, but
simple
come on.
example where a lot of people would just go do that. Like, oh, we need a HUD. We need to put 5 or however many. It might be 6, actually. But however many monsters there are. Okay, bam, 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 done, right? But I was like, no, I want to do this other thing. What does that mean when it comes to music? I didn't want
Video game music.
video. Yeah. Now, okay, so let's say there has been good video game music, but there are different kinds of good. Now, okay, so let's say there has been good video game music, but there are different kinds of good,
What is this?
right? Often good, especially the more historical you become. Often it's about doing something unexpectedly skilled within the limitations of what you have to deal with, right? So like if you go to the Commodore 64 and you have this SID chip and a lot of people are able to do a certain amount of stuff with it, and then you listen to a Rob Hubbard track on the C64 and he can make it just, the songs are just way cooler. And some version of that exists for every one of these, up until you're just playing regular
Digital audio.
digital audio.
Right.
There's some version of that limitation that the musicians are dealing with, and it takes a lot of skill to do well in that, right?
Absolutely, yes.
But often those constraints also like starves things artistically relative to other media. So for example, if you were making a game back in the not the home computer days, but like the home arcade machine, like home console days, I had an Atari 2600, which like couldn't even do music. Once in a while, there were like a series of beeps in sequence that was supposed to be kind of musical, right? One of my friends had the original Nintendo Entertainment System, which could do music, I believe, if I'm remembering
It
this
had
right.
a synthesizer chip in it. Yes, it could
Yeah.
do, it could do crude music.
But it could maybe do like one voice or something. maybe
yeah, they all
more.
had hard. I mean,
But,
machines.
but you also didn't have a lot of memory for the music, and so
Right.
it had to be a pretty short loop. And so the typical thing that you got on those is like there's a minute-long loop, and you play it while you're playing this level for like an hour.
So you're talking to a father of a son who was a rabid game player and developed a taste on his own, by the way, for the N64, right? Which is a machine that had hardware limitations in terms of sound and stuff, and but even later games that didn't have those limitations coming from Nintendo, they continued that aesthetic.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean, right?
They continue that aesthetic.
We established that this is what video game
Right.
music is.
Right, and Nintendo continued that aesthetic even into the Wii, right? Where the limitations. I mean, they had DVD storage. Now they had
Yeah.
like multiple hundreds of megabytes to deal with, but there's still. So having these games playing in the background basically all day, every day, it's like some evil carnival has installed itself in your backyard and plays the same songs all the way and won't go away, right? And
Yes.
it drove me crazy after a while. The video game music, it was so repetitive, and the sound design too. It was the same, especially in the Mario games. They used the same sounds,
The jump
over
sound
and
or whatever,
over
yeah.
and over again, and for hours. And if you're not playing if you're engaged with the game, it's different because you're doing stuff. But if you're not engaged with the game, you're just listening to it objectively as a soundtrack. You want to blow your brains out after 5 minutes. Right?
Another piece of advice that I heard from some audio person at the GDC a long time ago is to judge whether your sound is good, record a gameplay session and then go listen to it from the other room.
Yeah.
Right. That's
So
like
that's
that's how you know if there's enough variety.
So that's the situation of most parents. Is they're hearing it from the other room. They're not seeing the interactivity involved. All they're hearing is the same damn sounds being played thousands and thousands of times over again.
Yeah.
And
Anyway, so I didn't want that for
Right.
this game.
Good.
Right.
Okay, that's interesting advice.
And so, for example, you mentioned jump sounds. The jump sound in Braid is pretty small.
There is a
sonically.
sound?
Like it's like a little,
Yeah.
I don't know if that came through on the mic, but like I tap the table, right? It's like your feet pushing off the ground. It's
Wait.
not like boing,
Right.
right? Now,
That's a landing sound for sure. Yeah, okay. Like a shuffling of feet, basically.
now bouncing off a monster is a boing, but like that doesn't happen that often, right? Whereas jumping happens a lot more often. And so I made this kind of decision where I'm like, I'm thinking about this stuff. People out there can, of course, have their own opinion about whether I made the right choices, but I was thinking about this through this lens of like, I know that these games are grading and they've sort of settled into this pattern where they decided what a platformer is and they're executing that pattern. I want to break that, right?
Why is it still glowing?
So now when it comes to music,
No, it's not the same
clearly computers at this point can just play CD quality audio. And I'm like, okay, so that's what we're doing. It's a puzzle game. What does that mean, that it's a puzzle game? Well, you might be sitting in a level for a long time looking at a puzzle trying to figure it out. That means, firstly, if music is really short, it's going to repeat a lot of times. And that's just not really good for a lot of reasons. First, you get tired of it. What is music supposed to do? It's supposed to provide mood
I like
and
this,
maybe just
this
give you a
sort
little bit of
for the
interest, right,
commentary.
in the sonic. And
It's really calming.
once you know what this minute-long track is, it stops providing interest. And it doesn't really provide mood anymore either, because
No.
it's just, you know what this thing
Right.
is, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, what did I want the music to be? There's lots of examples of what don't I want. That doesn't solve what the game should be. So what did I want? Well, I knew I wanted this game to be very emotionally unprotected and not like there's a way in which you're doing a professional polished game or product in general there's an emotional hygiene that comes along with that, in the sense that there are ways that it's proper to be when expressing things in the game, and there's ways that it's not really proper.
Can you give an example?
And that's subtle.
Yes, examples.
I'm thinking of like straw man examples that maybe aren't going to be that informative. But let's, instead of proper, let's pivot for a second to personal versus non-personal, which is not the same thing, but related. A very high budget game with a large team, which may also be causal, who knows, right? Is very rarely personal. It doesn't tend to contain personal expressions unless they're from the person at the very top, but even rarely then, and usually those are fake, right?
So
Why? Because we've decided that there's this thing that these games should do, and it should
So let's use BioShock as an example.
It's been a long time since I played that.
But the creator had personal things.
BioShock is more personal than most games.
Yeah.
Okay. It is unusual. That is why he is regarded as, I hate the word auteur because people use it all the time in weird ways, but in fact, that's not even what that term means exactly.
No, it's not what it means, but yes.
But people use it that way.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's what it's come to me.
I don't know. And in fact, I'm realizing I don't want to go too far down this hole because I want to get back to talking about the music, which was
right.
the point.
Okay.
But, okay. I wanted the game to not be very emotionally guarded and not to be, like, if there was a choice between being personal and being professional, I would choose personal because there's so much less of that. And the vision of art that I had for this game, it changes with every game. Like, what am I trying to do? But I felt that games were usually not very personal. And then especially in the platformer genre, it was like this manufactured mascot thing, which isn't to say there isn't creativity sometimes. So for example, I worked at Oddworld briefly, not as an employee, as a contractor, but like those games had a lot of character in them. Like Lauren made up a lot of like a crazy world with characters that were not really that much like what you would see anywhere else.
Right.
But it's not really personal, I don't think. Like I don't know that much about Lauren from playing the game or how he comes across in person or how he feels or whatever. So personal was somehow something that seemed very rare in video games and was not really part of the tradition.
That's true. I mean, I think that's part of what the indie game revolution was about, was the emergence of personal games.
Yeah, quite possibly. I mean, I'm a little too close to it to really.
So it's odd because I mean, in the early days of making games, they were typically made by one person or a small team.
Yeah.
Right, and you would think those would be very personal, but they usually aren't, or weren't. There were exceptions, but generally not.
Yeah, and in fact, I was thinking a second ago about, for example, arcade games were very not personal, even though they were often made by one person effectively. I mean, obviously not the. For example, arcade games
Programmed by very
not personal, even though they were often made by one person effectively. I mean, obviously not the cabinet and stuff. But,
they were programmed by very small teams.
Yes.
Oh, shit.
Anyway, so when it comes to music, I wanted music that was of high quality in the sense that it really captured the deep and true kind of expressiveness that great music can have. That is entirely missing from 1-minute loops of platformer stuff.
You wanted real music.
Yeah.
That's the answer. All right, real puzzles. Come on. What do we got here? might have fucked up already. Oh wait. This is the first time when the platforms react this way. Okay. This. If I kill. Huh. What if I do the same thing with with the shadows? Oh, wait. Yeah, I think this is it. Fuck. If I could just... Fuck. No. Okay, man, there's gotta be a better way to do this. Okay, wait, what am I trying to do? Alright, one puzzle on this side, the other on this. All I need to do here is to get to the cannon. And then I should be able to get the puzzle piece. Seems to be easier. Yep. Pretty hard to execute there. So I can do this. Fuck. Like hanging me there. Bounce again, right? Fuck. But why is there a platform? It's like there's gotta be, it's not like the only way. It's probably like some other intentional way to do it. But I think it's doable. Right? Day too early. Yeah, let's think about it. Or not. Fuck, come on. Okay, but if I press the lever, I can't get back. That's closed. Fuck. Oh. Fuck. Like it's doable. It's just hard. Then like what? Okay, let's think about how to get the other puzzle piece. Maybe that's going to give me a hint. So if I get this one here, right? It's still not possible for me to get up there. It's gotta be like a maximum height you can get to with multiple jumps. I don't think this is going to work. Okay. Like if I press the platform, how am I going to get another one in? Do it and get back. Okay, well. Now what? Okay, so I think there's a way to get on this platform. But then what? Like, yeah, it doesn't seem like he's getting any higher. Fuck. So this might be a purpose of one of the platforms, to just move the guy here, but then I close this. either way, still don't know what I'm doing. Like, if I want to get on the platform, it's not really going to give me much. Like, if I could only get there, it'd be perfect. Maybe it's like it moves slow enough. Like I don't. Because you could get there probably from the other side if it's stationary. But how the hell? Like from here. Can I rewind in a way where I'm like in the mid-air? Shit, I probably can. Fuck. Ah! I completely forgot how to think about these ones. Also, I'm also stuck. Oh. There we go. Now what? So I needed to be higher. I could like jump, press the lever, quickly rewind where I was in the like. I don't know. This seems to be very time sensitive. Kind of collided, but it worked. Whew, okay. Took me a bit.
So one of the things about the game, we've already said, it wanted to feel kind of painterly, kind of analog, expressive. It's not a bunch of tiles. And there are places in the game where you would normally, traditionally, just splat out a bitmap a bunch of times, aside from map tiles. So for example, 2-.
Yeah, I recognize that dialogue. With Casey, who's always...
We didn't compose new...
Yeah.
We didn't compose new songs for the new edition because I don't think it's necessary and because it's also too big of a change. I don't want to change what the game is. But we did... it's more like we invested more into a richer soundscape. Now, the actual sound effects in the original game were literally, I bought them for 99 cents on soundrangers.com and did maybe a very small amount of audio editing. They were very utilitarian. They were relatively sparse. there weren't ambient sounds of any kind, so I was relying on the music to provide ambience, whereas you can often have both. And I just wasn't thinking that much about sound besides, I mean, I was thinking a lot about it in a certain way. You know, like I said, the jump sound is very minor, and I don't want sounds that don't indicate significant changes in gameplay state and that kind of a thing. But in terms of like actual quality within one sound effect, for example, like how good of an effect is it and stuff, I think I didn't have the bandwidth to think about that. And so the sound effects in the original game are not very good. I just have to say that bluntly. It's fine because they're good enough.
Are they updated now?
They are updated and they're much better. Now, they're better than they would be. So for a while they were purely, 99-cent sound effects. And then at two different times during development, when audio guys came on and worked on it, again, I'm talking about the original game, my instructions were just take what I was doing and make it a little better. Because the problem I had, again, with multiple people, so maybe I got unlucky, or maybe this was just the times, and this was mostly by email, right? I was like, hey, I would describe in a couple paragraphs what I want, and then regardless, everything that I got back sounded to me like a sound effect from a casual game, right? Like a gem matching game, or Farmville or something. And that was wrong for this.
Twinkly.
Yeah, lots of like reverb and just like
Overprocessed.
made for people with short attention spans, it seemed like, as well, right? And maybe that's what, since these games were big at the time, there were a lot of them. And so if you're an audio freelancer, maybe that's what most of the people who try to contract your services
That's
want.
what they want, yeah. And they assume that's what you wanted.
Yeah, and after some back and forth, when I'm saying, no, I don't really want it to sound like a casual game, I couldn't get that. And so what I said was, here's my original sound effect. Just make it a little better. And we'll go with that. And so that's what we did. And so, I mean, when I say the sound effects are not very good, I mean in a certain dimension of sonic interest internal to the sound effect. How much information is there in the sound?
Did you do any variations?
A little bit, yeah, but
During
not as many
gameplay?
as you would if you had a dedicated audio person on the game. and
Or
stuff.
or like nothing, like what you did in The Witness, for instance.
Like, I think there might have been 2 jump variations or something,
Yeah. I mean, nowadays the new machines are capable of creating in real time all incredible variety of variety.
Well, and also the audio team on the new game did a similar thing. They had more license to bring more creativity to it and revamp the sound effects, and they're all high quality.
Plus,
now.
you had an audio team.
Yeah, and that matters.
Have that before.
One of the worst. Oh, I played a game recently that did this. I don't even remember exactly which one it was. I rage quit the game because it was a puzzle game, platformer, and I was sitting there trying to solve a puzzle. And okay, one thing that platformers classically do is that the mascot or whoever has an idle animation, right? After you stand there for a while, it's a way of just having the game respond to you a little bit, making the character feel more alive. So typically, if you don't move for some amount of time, we play this animation. How long is that time? Your choice on that as a designer kind of determines what attention span you think your player has. Well, okay, and the size of the animation, which we'll get to in a second. But like, if you think people are fine sitting there for a minute, typically 2 minutes, and then the guy does some idle just to provide atmosphere and a little bit of character, that's one choice. Or maybe you're like, oh man, I really want people to see this idle animation. It's cool. Let's fire it off after 15 seconds so people see it a lot, right? That's a different choice about what your expectations are of the audience. Now, suppose you have an idle animation that fires after some amount of time that is approximately the amount of time that it takes to take in all the elements and start thinking about the puzzle. And then also suppose you have one of these like chiptune aesthetics and you attach a really obnoxious sound effect to the idle animation. so that every time I start dropping in and thinking about the puzzle, right then it's like, all right, like whatever noise it is, and the dude's like looking at you like, what? You know, often these mascot animations are obnoxious. They're like shrugging or like, I don't know what to do or whatever, right? Like famously, this isn't really a platformer, but famously, like the idle animation in MDK. Do you remember that game? No. Okay, well, it's like an over-the-shoulder like kind of shooter game or whatever, but it's over the shoulder. You're seeing your character from the back, and the idle animation is like the guy looks and turns around and like whatever, because that was the way that you could see the front of the guy's face, except you couldn't see his face because the idea of the game is he's got like some sniper helmet with like a big Pinocchio nose where the bullets come out. I don't know. It is a weird game.
Okay.
Anyway, so that particular game I was just complaining about is new. That didn't happen back in the Braid days, but I had that idea that I didn't want to do that stuff.
What am I?
One of the worst. Oh, I played a game recently.
What? Where was I? Oh, I guess there was a door here. Oh, wait. And then it teleported me up top. Okay, that's what confused me. Hidden cave. Yeah, it's a funny detail that I haven't noticed about the chandelier. How it breaks. And that people associate it with the atomic bomb. And it's like evident on the response of Jonathan Blow. It seems like it's just a coincidence. Unless he just somehow forgot about it. About this detail. But I don't believe it could be true.
Is your just quick technical procedural thing? Is your method that the programmer art and the final art produced by the artist is a drop-in replacement, literally?
Oh no, not at all.
Oh, so it's you had to reprogram.
I had to do a little
bit, but I didn't listen to something there. Third world redo.
My first inkling of why you had sent me this Braid game.
We discussed a case where David came up with the details of how to handle chandelier breaking visually.
Early prototype was programmer art, and for example, those chandeliers were like
The square.
gray rectangles with yellow balls on it.
I do programmer art, yeah.
Originally, as we said, they're just gray rectangles, and in fact, they would just sort of fall on the dude or not. It was like the minimum thing that you need to implement.
Right.
They would like change to a different sprite where the little glowy balls were like crushed or something, right? And that was also because early in the project, I was in a scarcity mindset where I was thinking the probability is that I'm not going to finish this game and I'm going to bail on it or something. So I have to minimize that risk and like, let's not get too big about what we're doing here and just go forward, right? But as the game went on and got bigger, I was like, well, I would be disappointed if we didn't do this or that. And in this particular case with the chandeliers, one of the things that I wanted to do is have in the game some representation of the idea of entropy going from low to high, and that being a thing that you can rewind and see happen, right? So like breaking the bottle or unbreaking the bottle is like a classic, it's like a classic example in physics or whatever.
That explains the wine glass puzzle piece, doesn't it?
A little bit.
Or that
not complete. It's not completely explanatory, I would say.
But
right?
it's a
connective.
It's a connective thread.
Yeah.
Right. But it's those little touches that make the difference between an ordinary thing and a rich thing.
Yeah. but in this case, I wanted that in the gameplay somewhere. And early on, I'm like, maybe there will just be something as I design the mechanics. But then eventually, I'm like, well, no. I became very clear. We don't actually want there to be a lot of mechanics in this game because it shouldn't have that, right? Not a lot of like basic platformer mechanics, right? But I did have this chandelier opportunity to do that, and it's like, yeah, it's not very flashy. You want to do something cool in the game that embodies this idea, so let me do this thing where the pieces break off. And I'm pretty sure I remember doing the programmer art version of all the pieces, which was especially weird and bad. But then when David came along and did the art for the chandeliers, we did that.
Alright. What was the... Did I see the world redo? I think I did. History of the boss monster. And why the boss conspicuously wears the key.
So then with the monster was programmer art. And in fact, the name, if you go in the code, the name of that monster is Gun Boss. And the reason he's Gun Boss is because early on, when you're just making a game and you don't know what it is yet, you get excited about I get excited about wacky ideas like, hey, wouldn't it be funny if this game like had a big dude with a gun in it, right?
Talked about
And then I started
this
thinking about that, and I kind of
with
didn't want
Bosch.
to program a big complex guy. I mean, he was in the game for a while, again, similarly as like he's a texture that moves around and you drop the things on him and he runs out of hit points and dies with the HUD squares.
Yeah.
That was all playable for a long time. And then I think while he was still programmer art, I got the idea to put the horns on him.
I'm trying to understand the concept here.
So the point is he has 5 hit points.
And there are 5 horns.
Yeah, and every time you knock him with a chandelier, one of the horns flies off, and when he runs out of horns, he dies.
That's great. Okay,
Yeah.
that's simple.
Now, I also kept
I never
the
noticed
HUD.
that, but it's cool.
Yeah. Well, I also kept the HUD, which is maybe why you don't notice it, because you don't need that
Right.
to figure it
I mean,
out.
the HUD's almost, either the HUD or the horns almost.
They're redundant.
Yeah,
And
redundant.
the reason I kept the HUD, like when I originally did the horns, I was like, we'll probably get rid of the HUD. And then I
People
didn't
might
want
not
to.
notice the horn. Well, I didn't notice
Yeah,
the
well,
horns.
exactly.
Right?
But you might have noticed the horns if the HUD wasn't there.
Right.
But it was just one of those things where I was like,
No, it makes
also,
sense.
the initial spirit of the game, like I thought it was funny to have a HUD like that. That's like, this is happening now. And I just kept that. It was like a flavor note that happens once in a while that I just kept.
That's a nice way of putting it.
This is obviously 2 redundant elements. So you should either have one or the other. And in fact, if I were being stern about game design, I would normally say that.
Redundancy is not necessarily wrong.
It is if you want.
It can be a reinforcing thing.
It can. It can. Anyway, so I put the horns on him, but he basically was, okay, so originally, like in my imagination, before I ever built the dude, he was like probably some dude standing around and he would like aim his gun around and the gun was probably like a big thing. And then I'm like, I don't want to program that right now because I have more important things to do. But also, you know, if you're trying to hit him with chandeliers and stuff, you kind of want him to be close to a sphere or a circle. And the reason behind that was because the collision code, right? So these monsters, for example, if you sort of think about what's the circle that roughly approximates their shape,
personality ones.
that's what the collision code is testing against. And so you want the visuals to be as close to that as possible. Otherwise it feels weird. Like, oh, I'm hitting him when I shouldn't, or I'm not hitting him when I should, right? And so then I thought, okay, maybe this guy
each one has like
is just
a
a
different face. but
bigger version of one of these
He's
little
explained that
monsters.
the-
He's like
the
got big
too
and fat
much.
from living in his throne room or something. And
Or he's the boss.
well, he's the boss, yeah. And then instead of having this gun that spins around, I also thought about like, okay, where do the bullets come out if you have this gun that's changing angle? And can players deal with that? And do you have weird scenarios where if you're inside the radius of wherever the barrel edge bitmap is, that you don't get hit by the things, and then if you're
Oh,
outside,
yeah,
you
right.
do. I didn't really want any of that, so I'm just like, you know what? He's gonna just shoot shots out of his mouth, right? So it was this process of simplifying the guy. Now the specific look, I think, was developed in large part by David, because the thing that I drew certainly didn't
The
have
cannon
many
holding
appealing
guy.
properties. But we talked over some stuff, like how do the horns work? In the original one, it's just like horns stuck on this guy. I mean, do the horns go into his head, or are they on the helmet? And like, there's weird consequences of thinking about that either way. You know, he's wearing armor as an indicator that, you know, he's tough, and it makes the character of the, well, you may think about who else in the game is wearing armor.
I was going to bring him up later.
Yes.
Others have noticed the distinct resemblance between this creature and the knight who appears in the final level.
Yeah. And so, you know, we had these discussions and balanced these factors, and came up with the design.
Which, considering the atomic bomb interpretation of this thing, is a rather interesting thing to do. What does that imply? Yeah, but what does that imply, John? I mean, the princess is running into the arms of what?
You know,
Damn it.
the game is what it is, man.
Ah.
So
That's a non-answer. So that's okay. It's like, you don't have to. Some of these things don't have answers. It's something the listeners have to appreciate.
they're not, you know, there aren't answers
not
that I'm going to
answers-
verbalize.
Oh. So you actually have something in mind there. It's not.
What I would say is, the specific question that you just said is not exactly the way that I think about it.
Okay. Here he's doing his famous cagey act, people.
I hate when creators do that. Just explain.
But yeah, there's
been
other
10
functional
years.
things that the boss had to do
Right.
as well that help determine the look. So initially, I think with the programmer art version, you know, it's just this guy, you drop the chandeliers on him, he dies, and then the key pops out. That's bad game design, because, like, if there's something you need to do to proceed forward in the game, which you do here, because the door's locked, you can't get out of this level. Most of the game you can walk through, right? But these levels, you cannot exit them by walking on the right unless you beat the boss. So they're the few choke points in the game, which is part of what makes them dramatic as well. Like, if you could just walk past this boss, he's kind of lame. But so if you need something to proceed, and the game gives it to you arbitrarily in response to something you did not expect, then you're not really proceeding intentionally through the game. That's, like, broadly speaking, a not very good thing for a game to do.
Right. Yeah, Ron Gilbert makes this observation in his criticism of adventure game designs.
Yeah.
Finding the answers before the problem.
Yeah.
Right.
And so it was definitely a thing that I wanted to do, to make the key visible. And then how is it visible? Is he, like, holding it? That might imply that you can go grab it from him, because you can do that with the smaller monsters, right? And so it's actually like locked via some clasp onto his armor until he gets knocked out. These were all things that we went back, like, relatively small details that nobody would notice were big parts of the conversation.
That's where the difference between something fine and something ordinary happens, is in those little details.
Yeah, but the problem is there's always things afterward that you look back and you're like, yeah,
course.
should have thought of that
Why
one.
didn't I think? Oh, lost opportunities. It's
Yeah.
All my games, Loom in particular. Oh God, so many missed opportunities there that were low cost tweaks I could have made that just would have, like, amped it up. I mean, you see it all too late,
Yeah.
right? Because when you're in the middle of, you know, I'm working 80-hour weeks for months.
Yeah.
You know, you're not always at your best when you're.
Oh, totally. Like,
the
there's
weeds,
an
right?
expansive mode of mind that is conducive to that kind of noticing.
Yes.
And you don't get to do that when you're grinding through to-do lists all the time.
You do not.
It's a very different mode of operation. Now I have a little bit of an advantage relative to what you're talking about with Loom because like my games just take so long. Like calendar time solves problems.
Yeah, well, it gives you more chances to see these things.
It gives
right?
you chances to like wake up in the morning and go, oh yeah, I know
or
what
have
the
the
answer
shower
is.
moment, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I found that those, if I'm too snowed under by to-do lists, those don't happen very often. But they happen much more often when I'm not.
Right.
But nevertheless,
No, I could have made. I mean, Braid took 2.5 years.
3.5.
3.5.
total.
Okay, so that's like
It's like 2 looms at least,
two,
right?
2 or 3 looms. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's also what I encounter a lot in my work. Alright, that's all the conversations with Brian. Can I kill myself? Shit. Oh, it's too fast. Can't even get back there in time. Oh, it's going to be the poster. It's gotta be one of the hands. Here? Like the fact that the cannon is this way is just confusing, I guess. Might all be warped. Yeah, this seems right. This also could be possible. That's probably this one. Alright, we'll end it for today. Still a lot to go through. Wait. Why was there a sound? It's like the epilogue singing woman sound. That only happens when you're covered by something. Strange. Well, anyway. Alright, see you next time, guys. Oh shit, I wasn't getting the comments, sorry. They weren't in my phone for some reason because of some glitch, so oops. To what degree are you okay content with the fact that John treats story as secondary to gameplay? Oh, I'm fine with that. It depends on like what's kind of what you're trying to do. Like it's in some games I like the story part much more, and usually in these kind of games the gameplay is basically nothing. Here it's all about puzzles. So like I don't think he treats it well. Yeah, I guess he treats it as secondary more than not, but the story part is still uh, received a lot of love. No, not by Jones' caginess, but I do get it. It's the kind of thing where, as an artist, you have to draw the line somewhere in regards to what you're willing or able to explain. Yeah, but let's like also kind of. On one hand, it could be insecurity that you just can't explain something that you did, or don't want to explain something because it will sound silly, right? And sometimes you don't even somebody may view your work as something much greater than you actually intended it to be, and you just want to like pretend that this is the way. And I feel like like Jonathan Blow doesn't really need to. He has substance. Like he could just explain what he meant, and it will be fine. But also like it's better usually to keep the mystery going, so there's more importance to it. I don't know. Well, yeah, I'm just going to end the stream already because it's it's black screen. And 3 hours exactly. Wait, no. Okay, bye.